Ladies and gentlemen, this is the school committee meeting of Thursday, January 16. We're glad to have you all here. We have a couple of school committee members one who will be late, Barbara Scotto, but she will be here, and another, Amy Kershaw, who has had a number of emergencies in her state job and has one this evening, so she won't be able to attend at all. There may be people here for the farewell to our Chinese friends. I hope you got the word that we're going to do one or two things before we get to that, because we have some members who need to go up to the 40B hearing upstairs. So we're not going to start with our Chinese friends until about 6:45. I'm sorry if you didn't get that word, but that's the way it's got to be. I will ask my colleagues if anyone chooses to say anything about the consent agenda. Somebody want to move the consent agenda, please? Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. Wonderful. Now, we have also staff going up to the 40B hearing, and as a result, Dr. Lupini, I think you'd like to introduce a couple of staff people outside of the report that you're going to give later.
I would, thank you. You have a copy of my report, and I appreciate the opportunity, given that one of these individuals is going to accompany the group to the 40B hearing, to introduce two people who have joined us one in the last week, one in the last month this evening. So the first individual I want to introduce is Megan Marr, who is our Director of Community Engagement. As is included in my report, Megan recently served as press secretary for Congressman Stephen Lynch, managing media and online communication and acting as spokesperson and speechwriter. Megan comes to us very highly recommended by Karen Schwartzman, who we worked with last year. And she's been with us for the last month and doing a terrific job already in working with the people at BATV around our website and a number of other projects. In particular, I think spending time on our long-term strategies and developing that kind of long-term plan. And there's Megan at the podium. Hi, Megan. So Megan Marr.
Hi, thank you very much, Bill. I'm very excited to be a part of Public Schools of Brookline.
And I can vouch for the fact that Megan's got plenty to do right from the beginning. Thank you, Megan. We're enjoying working with you already.
I'm also very excited to introduce Corey Stott, who started with us this week as our Director of Accountability and Research. That's a collective yay from the senior staff and principals in particular, and the school committee. Thank you.
Please, yes, bravo.
For the past 18 months, Corey has served as Director of Organizational Effectiveness at the Achievement Network. In that position, her responsibilities included building knowledge management systems, processes, and norms for all organizational teams to assure high level of data quality, including comprehensive data governance policies. And she also served while at the Achievement Network as the Manager of Performance Analytics and Project Director for Investing in Innovation. And we are thrilled that she is here. From the time we interviewed in the fall, it's been sort of we can't wait till Corey's here, and you're finally here. So congratulations, welcome.
Thanks for the warm welcome, and I'm really excited to be here to get started.
Great.
Can I say something?
Please,
Stay here for a second.
please.
So I've been I've been a friend of Ms. Siegel's for over 20 years, and I'm expecting that friendship will end soon since you are here. So thank you for coming. We're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morse, for allowing
You're
me.
very welcome, Dr. Lupini, anytime. So now, in order to have everybody who needs to be freed to go up to the 40B, Ms. Stone, if you would talk to us about the proposed changes to the Public Schools of Brookline student residency policy, particularly intersected properties.
I would be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we know where Ms. Charlevsky is? Because I know
She's
she...
on her way. I just got a
Okay.
text from her.
'Cause she wanted to be here for this. I want to start by really thanking everybody, particularly the subcommittee members, Ms. Cox and Mr. Chang, for the work that they've put into this, and especially a special thank you to Gary McCabe, the Town Assessor's Office, who has made himself and his office available to us as we've tried to work through how this can, how the various issues could be resolved successfully, and also his pledge for the ongoing cooperation of his office in helping us implement this policy. I believe that what we are bringing before the committee tonight for discussion is a terrific outcome of a very long and often difficult conversation among ourselves and with the community. But I think we have gotten to the point where we have focused on the most important issues for the schools, and done so in a way that is respectful and responsive to the concerns that we heard from the community. So what this policy does, and again, just to remind everybody, this is just one small subsection of the larger policy that was revised last year having to do with proof of residency, which was our major focus. So this subsection sets a new standard of at least 25% or more of assessed property in Brookline to be eligible for enrollment in the public schools of Brookline. That would obviously pertain only to border properties that are intersected by the town boundary. This review explicitly grandfathers all children currently in intersected properties, all intersected properties, whether they are apartments or owned single dwelling units. It also explicitly grandfathers all single-family dwelling units that were purchased as eligible for the public schools of Brookline prior to the policy change. That grandfather covers, obviously, the children who are there now, but it also would cover sale of that property to another family. The important exemption that we've put in here is that grandfather is voided if the property, that is to say the property would then be subject to the new 25% standard. Should there be changes to the property normally upon resale that expand the number of dwelling units on the property? So if the property is a single-family dwelling, and it is, welcome Representative Coppinger, nice to see you.
Oh, I don't get that?
Welcome Ms. Charlevsky, nice to see you too. If that property is altered or expanded so that the number of dwelling units at that address as a part of that property extends past its now single-family dwelling unit, then that would void the exemption. That would be a change that would subject the new properties, all of the new properties, to the 25% rule. We do, as we have always had in here, there is a secondary requirement that if you are in an apartment building that is known to be intersected by the town line, when you're seeking to enroll your student, you need to provide proof of residency of the unit that you live in, as opposed to simply the building address. There is a right of appeal, which is specific to a student's right to enroll rather than a property's designation, changing a property's designation. And there is the usual notice that, the usual assurance that the school committee will, or the administration will keep a current list of properties that are intersected that are eligible for enrollment so that we can be responsive to the community or upon requests. We also will have the cooperation of the assessor's office to change how they respond to those inquiries as well, to make sure that people are getting all of the information they need to get to make good decisions. I did get one comment back on the draft that was circulated to all of you, that changes just the word property to the words dwelling unit in the first paragraph. So that's the fourth line. Multi-unit building on which a minimum of 25% of the dwelling unit is assessed by the town of Brookline. I want to thank Scott Gladstone for pointing that out, because otherwise we would have put ourselves right back into the problem we were trying to get out of. And the other change, to be very, very clear, that the distinction between how rental apartments in larger buildings are being treated and how single-family units are being treated, whether condo or single-family homes. In subsection A, number 2, where it says intersected dwelling units purchased as PSB eligible, it should read, I believe, intersected single-family dwelling units purchased as PSB eligible. And in the case of, then in the first line, in the case of single-family dwelling units, intersected to whatever degree by the town boundary line. So again, that just allows us to distinguish. One member of the community pointed out to us that if we were using language pertaining to owner-occupied, that would not necessarily include a condominium that was bought and then rented. So we wanted to be clear about that. And I believe those are the only two changes that I think are necessary for the clarifying issues that have already been raised with me. But I also want to say that the 25% number was chosen by the subcommittee because it is consistent with what we believe to be the usual interpretations of the only decision that anybody really goes on, which is the Teal decision that we've talked about. But because of the way we've constructed this, we don't necessarily have to use 25%, but we felt that was sufficient to represent a significant portion. But again, that was just where the subcommittee came out. Invite your comments and questions about that as well. And with that, I open it up.
Let me just thank both the chairman of the subcommittee, Ms. Stone, the two subcommittee members, for an incredible amount of work and thought that was put into all of this. Appreciate it very much. And now,
I want to personally thank Rebecca Stone's leadership on this topic, because obviously it's a very important topic with a lot of feelings and community in terms of what people we're hearing from the people in the community. And I want to personally thank her for, again, her leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Ms. Cox.
I'd also like to thank Ms. Stone, who took a lot of heat with a great deal of aplomb and led us through a very difficult conversation. I just have two things that I'm sorry I wasn't able to comment earlier. So in section A1, about the dwelling units and intersected multifamily buildings, did we want to say children of families residing in that dwelling unit as of the date of adoption, because otherwise we might lead to splits in families that currently live there if a child is born to a family that already has children in the schools?
I'm confused. The reason it says children residing in that dwelling unit was to cover, that was the language that we adopted before to make sure that even children who were not yet eligible for the schools could enroll.
Okay. I guess my confusion is, so if there are children living in a rental unit who are currently in our schools, and that family has another child, is that covered?
Ah, very good point. Children of families. Thank you.
Okay. And in the second paragraph,
Does everybody understand that? Okay, great.
in the paragraph below that, I was just wondering if we need to clarify. It says, any children who ever reside in those dwelling units will be eligible. If that comes into conflict with other rules we have about who's eligible, such as, if I have an Italian exchange student living in my house who I don't know if would otherwise necessarily be eligible, do we need to say, and are otherwise eligible?
So the language that says eligible for the public schools of Brookline on the basis of residency. That's
Okay.
why that line is in there.
Okay.
Because it only speaks to their eligibility as far as residency is concerned. It does not speak to any other eligibility.
Okay, so that
Which
covers
would be subject
it.
to
Okay.
different
That's right.
policies.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Discussion,
Yes,
since we're not voting tonight.
that's true. Ms. Chalupsky, did I see you raise your hand?
Well, sort of.
Sort of. Well, I sort of recognize you then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of the percentage, I've sort of gone back and forth in my head as to what is a right amount. I mean, forget laws and whatever's out there. What would be, to the reasonable person, the right amount of a house to be in a district that would then qualify the children to be in the district? 50% to me sounds, the reasonable amount. On the other hand, I certainly don't want our lawyers getting involved with law cases and stuff like that. So I want to put it out there, but I'm not sure what to do with it. And just for discussion, I guess, more than anything else.
We certainly had a lot of discussion about that. I think Ms. Cox said at the last meeting that she and I have had the same experience, which is that many people we've talked to have been surprised that it's not 50%, and have tended to believe when they heard that there were intersected properties that we were talking about intersected properties that were really substantially in Brookline. And we're always very surprised to hear that there were any that were much more substantially in another jurisdiction because of the quirk of the boundary lines, and the way the properties have been developed over time. That said, Town Council has been pretty clear that a 50% standard would not stand up to challenge. That the way that the courts have decided the cases that are out there, that it's way too hard to determine where, because our law says actually reside, right? So it's up to lots of interpretation. So that's why we had this long conversation about reasonable person versus, the gut check versus the.
Right. And that's why I
Right.
sort of was hesitant
Yeah.
to bring it up. On the other hand, I think we should at least have it out there in the records that we thought about it, and that,
I mean, the one argument for starting at a higher than a higher percentage is that it is if you think to future school committees, it is a lot easier to change something to be more generous than it is to
This
change
is true.
something to be less generous.
as we know.
And so, so to me, that would be the only argument for putting this, is thinking about our future colleagues on this board who might be coming up against this, that they may want to, they may take a look at it and say, no, it should be less, whereas it's very, very difficult to say, no, it should be more. So, I mean, we could talk about that. I don't know whether anybody else has a feeling about it.
Any thoughts from anyone else? My own, I'm just wondering what the downside is.
The downside of setting it something like 30% or
Yes,
35%?
yes.
Or 50.
Well, setting it at 50%, I think we've been pretty clearly told that that would be a
All right.
mistake.
I'll go for
Yeah,
that.
that was
That
my feeling.
that's really not consistent with anybody's interpretation of the law.
You said 25 is sort of how people think about Teal, the single
Right.
case. So that's coming
Right.
from the law to the extent that there really isn't law. I mean, there's just this one case and it's, but still one can justify that number as being derived from the legal research to the extent that there's any.
That's right.
Yes.
So that is a downside, you're saying, Mr.
No, I'm saying
Pollack,
it's the
that,
right number. It's the best number we can come up with. It's the least impeachable number we can come up with. So can I ask a question for a clarification?
I'm good.
As far as I read this, it's sort of eliminated disenfranchisement of both children who are in the schools or the future children and the families in the schools now, in
Yes.
multifamily.
Yes.
And that as far as any kind of home ownership, both condominium and single-family dwelling, so condominium would more or less take in a two-family or a three-family where the people owned their own units, or whatever, those units, even if they're only just one shingle is nicked by the town line or whatever, I mean, if they've been eligible,
If they've
those
been
units,
eligible.
if they've been eligible, those units continue to be eligible, they're grandfathered, and so essentially in terms of home ownership, this takes the economic investment value of those families off the table.
Yes.
And that's completely accomplished. So that's the intent, and you're wordsmithing it to make sure that it follows through. So, and it's only an alteration, presumably for economic advantage, in adding units, in subdividing, in, whatever, building more, where that is then, the grandfathering is then lost.
Right, and
which
it's
is
not,
sort of a balance.
and it was not so much the economic advantage that we were thinking about. I actually want to credit Ms. Scotto for her comments, which got me thinking differently about this, when she talked about the expectations, the risks that one could reasonably expect to have measured, and the risks that would not have reasonably been measured in investing in a property. So what we were actually looking at was what the risk to the schools. The schools are worried about enrollments, mostly enrollments from development that creates more and more room for people to move into Brookline. And so our concern about the border properties is not, in fact, the kids who are there. We were going to grandfather the kids who were there anyway. The worry is that those border properties will become a part of the larger problem in the long run as they turn over and perhaps get developed and turned into multifamily potential. And so that's where the idea, so focusing in on the real concern of the school committee about future enrollments was how we got to this. So it's not about the economic argument.
Okay.
It protects the economic investment while also protecting the schools against future development along the border.
I mean, again, and that's all in the future, it's all hypothetical, because there's no, I mean, I guess in terms of rental properties, the 25% is going to change their status, not for anybody who lives there now, but
Right.
that will be a change.
That's right.
But otherwise, it doesn't, there's no properties that we can say, at least homeownership properties where anything changes today. It's just if they go for a building permit to add.
To subdivide or
Right.
condo or
And
things like that.
one thing that didn't seem to be addressed, which I don't know if it's even possible on any of these border properties, but hypothetically would be a land subdivision. It just, Is that encompassed in the language that you put down? Subdivision of property? Because it really only talks about dwelling units.
It is encompassed in the caveats. Any additional dwelling units added onto an exempt dwelling unit or added onto the property at the same address, for example, as through the addition of townhouses onto a single-family home or the conversion of a carriage house into a dwelling unit, shall not be exempt under this section.
You
So,
could add or subdivision of the property.
yeah, I don't think it's necessary, because
okay.
we don't worry about subdivision of the property, we worry about dwellings. And that's
But if you
clear
s-
that any
okay,
new
If
dwelling.
you subdivided
right?
the property and then there was a new address to the subdivided property, there might be a technicality that would avoid
But that
your
would,
language.
that new dwelling would be subject to the policy, which sets it at 25%.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Well, it's another marvelous example, in my opinion, of, at least in Brookline, how democracy works. We had a substantial amount of disagreement in the beginning. It was worked out in an entirely civil way, and at least for a first reading, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank
Bravo.
you again to everybody who contributed to reaching, I think, this very good result. So I will make those few brief changes, and we will schedule this for a vote on the 30th, right?
Yes.
And just to finish policy, we meet next, Ms. Coyne, can you correct me on this, on February 5th? And we will be taking up different policies at that time. I hope Ms. Cox will finally have a chance to talk to us about her very good work on after-school and use of out-of-school time and use of buildings. And we may also be looking at the policy on tutoring, which the superintendent has been eager to review. So, thank you all.
Great. So, Ms. Cohen, I'd like to go back and just display the calendar for a moment, if that's feasible. I didn't do that at the beginning because I wanted to make sure that we got through as much of this as we needed to do. So will it come up here? It will. Okay. So I'd just like everybody to take a look at the schedule for January and February, particularly regarding school committee and subcommittee meetings, and also about the schedule for override study committee meetings, and in addition, the one conversation with the superintendent that will be held at the Brookline, or with the Brookline Early Education Program parents, if that's correct. That's been postponed? Oh.
That's been postponed for the 22nd. That's the big public hearing for the.
Yeah, it does. I noticed that.
It's been postponed.
Okay. Then we will take that off the list. And we're just looking then at all of the school committee-related meetings and the override study committee meetings that we know about. And we haven't got it quite up there yet, so we'll wait for a moment until we can show the public here and the massive number of viewers that we know are looking at us throughout Brookline. almost there.
Mr. Chairman. Well, while we're pulling up the calendar, just the only, while there is a raft of choices for everyone to select from if they're interested in the override study committee process, the one that I would highlight is next Wednesday's public hearing, which there may be some substantial amount of interest in, and certainly it's, I know all of the school committee members are keen to hear from the public, since many of the policy issues do relate to the schools, around class size, around the Metco materials fee programs, around early education, around full-day kindergarten, some of the things we've been discussing for many, many years. Many months in deep detail and years before that. So many of those issues are getting discussed, if there's anyone in the public who's interested, as well as a large number of potential issues on the town side, such as public safety, the Putterham Library. There was a whole list of things mentioned last night. So I would commend anyone who's interested to the Override Study Committee page for a set of those reports, and sometime in the next 36 hours, there will be a list of issues that will be circulated to folks. Of course, it's a public hearing; anybody can speak on anything they like, but there'll be a list of issues for consideration, so that will summarize it. So. We'll be in the Selectmen's hearing room, and presumably there will be overflow capacity in this room.
So get there early for a good seat.
But if people want to speak, they need to be in the selectmen's room to do so.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and once again, just the bottom item on that calendar has been postponed, and we'll have the new date certainly by the next meeting. Okay, I think that's good. Thank you, Ms. Coyne, very much. So I think we're ready for the I think everybody's here. Yeah, I did hear that. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So we are now ready, a little bit early but for some of you a little bit late, for our Chinese friends to say goodbye. And so, Mr. Lantos.
We've got a few people here.
Is everybody here?
I think so. Okay, Chairman Morse, Superintendent Lupini, members of the school committee, thank you. It's hard to believe that we stood before you here almost 5 months ago to introduce the 14th annual group of students from our sister school, the Gaoxin No. 1 school in Xi'an. So I'd like to call up our teacher, Lu Jin. She's going to introduce some of the students who I think have some thoughts and reflections to share over their semester with us. Lu Jin. Who, by the way, as the representative from the Gaoxin School who accompanies the students here, she wears many hats here as both teacher of Chinese 6 at the high school during the semester, the Uber parent of our 8 exchange students, counselor, mentor, friend, and many other things. So I want to just ask for some applause and acknowledgement for Lu Jin.
Good evening, everyone. How time flies. It seemed like yesterday. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Hi. How time flies. It seemed like yesterday when I talked here for the first time, but 5 months have passed. My students and I often talk about why the people around us are so kind to us. We concluded that it's because they are full of love. Brookline is full of love. So today, I have a lot of people to thank. First, I want to thank Mr. Lupini and Ms. Holman. Thank you so much for your support for the program and the help you gave us. My ears often echo with your love that makes me I feel relaxed and warm. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Grant and Judy. They are always so kind to us and often think a lot for us. I also want to thank Nancy. She is so loving and she treats my kids like her family. Every year, she welcomes us with warm beds and the hearty, delicious food on the skiing trip. At school, Mr. Chang, Ms. Shorter, and Mr. Marcus help us a lot. I really appreciate the help from them, and I will never forget the Christmas day I spent with Ms. Shorter's family and the amazing experience I had with Ms. Marcus' family. The teachers in Brooklyn High School are not only friendly to my kids, but also help them a lot with their lessons. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have organized everything for us so well. You often spend your weekends with us and went on numerous trips with us. I cannot imagine what our experience would be like without your effort and dedication. We appreciate everything you have done for us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Finally, I want to thank all the host families. You opened your homes and hearts to us. You offered everything we need. All of you take such good care of us and make us feel at home. Thank you. All of us have a second warm home in the world, Brookline. We will always remember and appreciate everyone's warmth and hospitality. We'll cherish the memories of our lives here in Brookline forever. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shi Yixin. I'm from this exchange program. I'm so happy to be here and share my experience and feelings from these last 4 months. Brookline High School is awesome. It's true. I like my teachers, my classes, and my friends here. They help me get over the difficulties and encourage me. At the beginning, it was pretty hard to get used to all the classes in English. I admit that during the first week, I felt so bad, and it seemed impossible for me to join their class. I was really upset, especially in math class. I didn't know the basic knowledge of the polar unit of the class, so the class made no sense to me. However, Miss Constant, she's my math teacher. She helped me after school and she said she believed in me. Not only Miss Constant, but also the other teachers helped me a lot. I began to understand the equality among all the students. Thank you, my teachers, and thank you, Brookline High. On this exchange program, I learned not only the knowledge, but also the life method. We had lots of discussion with our partners and we learned new things by ourselves, instead of being taught by our teachers only. I began to think more deeply about cooperation, self-directed learning, and self-control. Also, I really want to thank my host family. They are my sisters and my parents. They try their best to make me feel at home. They give me the happiness from the family and make me not feel alone. I love them. Plus, I'm so lucky to go on this exchange program with the other 7 students. They also helped me a lot. We hung out together, we spent the 4 months together, we helped each other and get over the difficulties together. Thank you, my friends. In a word, I'm so happy and so lucky to be on this exchange program and make friends with all of you. That will be a precious memory for me. That's all. Thank you again.
Hi, everyone. Oh, doesn't work well. I don't care. Okay. Hello, everyone, and hopefully you remember the uniform. Yeah, of course you do. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. It's very nice to see you again. Yeah. Remember me? No, maybe not. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Henry. Well, Chinese name Chen Xizhou. And it's really a pleasure for me to give a speech here. Technically, it's my last month in Boston, but I feel like I just started to know the city a little bit deeper, to figure more about the charm of the culture, to observe the beauty of the city. Everything's quite new. That I have a feeling of it's no longer the place I lived for 5 months. But like a fresh dream, every minute is another great start. When I notice more things, the city changes and attracts me more. But anyway, I have to leave. So I have to leave some words that to let you remember me for some time. And also, it's why I'm standing here right now. At the exchange program, there's really nothing better to say but thank you at the very end. The past 4 months was a challenging experience for me, so I appreciate everyone who ever helped me out. My host family, hey Diego, and they created a great life quality for me, and yeah, here it is. All the teachers who taught me not only knowledge, but spirit. The exchange program and people care for it. School officers, like Steve, Mr. Wolf, and all of you here, of course. It's the most basic but important thing. If the program can run smoothly, then I'll probably in China here, now. And especially for me, I'm a person who is not outgoing and it's sort of weird in personality profile. Oh, don't laugh, it's true. Now, sometimes I cause problems because I sleep late, I forget my homework, or even I don't like eating cheese or pizza, that stuff. Then I come over it. Can you imagine? People now around me turning into part of my life. We're just strangers 4 months ago. The change is so big that I feel how sincerely people treat me everywhere, every time. So, necessarily, I thank all of you again. I won't be here today without their help. Also, besides them, many interesting and unforgettable stories took place during my stay here. I will choose one to share you about how I changed my mind of making friends with American kids. When I was in Brooklyn High School at first, you cannot say I grasped the key of how to behave and communicate. I would rather stay alone. But there's a student in my English and history class, wow, what coincidence, in my English and history class. And he seemed to show great interest in me and wanted to make friends with me. At first, I didn't care so much because he's the kind of man who jokes a lot, is popular with many other students, and is too outgoing to stay calm in class, and our learning processes always interrupt when he expresses his opinion directly. I think he's at the opposite side of mine. So, as a result, we just say, what's up? We meet each other, but really nothing more. Oh, sorry. You see, I couldn't deal the relation with others well, so I chose to hide myself in my box, which means I don't really get into others' world. But I'm glad it's not sad story, for I began to change. As we spent more time together, I found he's really nice and friendly to me. For every time he sees me, he says hello to me. Also, my attitude was getting more and more positive. So, logically and naturally, I recognized our friendship. Now, it's pretty good and common for us to meet and clap in the hallways. It should be the smallest thing that may happen in one's school life. Anyway, it is significant to me, so because I learned how to confront a different type of people, friendship, or even culture. That does help. In any case, I get a happy ending. So, that's a cool thing. Alright, I've done with my job. Thanks a lot for listening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Su Kai Xiang. It has been a long time since I came here. It's not just like yesterday because so many things has been remarkable enough for me to remember. I want to thank all the people who provided help for us. I want to thank my family in Brookline, including Ima, Abba, Amir, Leo, and Rui. I'm enjoying all the lessons learned from my teachers of the 7 subjects I studied at BHS. They are so kind and smart that it's really a kind of joy to learn. Mr. Lentos and Mr. Wolf are like messengers. Thanks for their efforts on this project and their kindness. They are so friendly and helpful. I am thankful for all my classmates and friends and for all the happiness we created together. Thank you to Miss Liu because she always takes care of us, and to Mr. Chen and Mrs. Shorter for their warm-hearted help and enlightening words. I am grateful for all the social connections I have here. They let me really fit into this society. It has been and still is an invaluable opportunity for me to come here, and it is going to make an indelible change in my life. But at the same time, the change goes on so smoothly that I don't even remember what I was like before I came to America. At the same time, I can tell I was changing when single things happened. One major change is that my attitude towards some specific things used to be obstinate. Now it's much more open and tolerant. The major reason is that I learned that there is no absolute truth, thus there is no absolute judgments. Therefore, all the conflicted judgments, if they have final results, that must be based on the reasonable surrender of the minority to the majority, instead of the so-called justice. Such sentences are summarized from the lesson I learned from my conversations with my host family. Most of the conversations are profound and enlightening, I have to say, and they really taught me a lot. There are other changes too. One of them is the progress I made in my English. It's really amazing to feel such change happen to myself. The way I learned English here is very different from the way I learned English in China. You have to make progress because you're submerged in the atmosphere of English. Just like my host brother Amir said, it's faster to grasp a language by using it as a tool than by learning it as a subject. In addition, a result of living in the US is that you can experience various kinds of culture, and all the cultures are attractive in their own ways if you pay attention to them. Many students here can speak more than one language, which is very helpful and interesting. It's kind of a miracle that languages in the world can be translated into different languages. That shows it is a pattern for people on this planet to communicate with each other. But still, there are difficulties in translation because of the cultural divergence. That is exact one of the beauties of languages and cultures. Also, you can see the differences of the expressions. Some languages are more rational, while other languages may be more emotional. These sort of differences come from the different styles of economy, politics, and geography in different regions. So, in my opinion, I think language is the outside performance of the culture of a group of people. Therefore, I regard learning languages as a journey of discovery of that group of people. I also learned and felt cultures and costumes of other countries. Here is my approximate definition of culture. People who live in different environments came out with different methods to deal with the society. And parts of the methods, in order to make things easier, were made to patterns, so that people can teach them to the next generation to make them live more easily. It's hard for people to change the patterns. At least it takes time. If you learn other patterns when you have contact with people from other regions who have different patterns in their minds, usually it's helpful to use patterns that is close to theirs, because it will make people feel their own society. If everyone know some general patterns, more or less, it will make communications better and easier. I really learned a lot in America, and I do appreciate it. Deep in my mind, many things are changing, and they will be carved on my mind. I will never forget the life in America, and I will always be glad to recall it. Thank you.
I want to ask Adam Wolf, who's our teacher, who will be taking our 8 Brookline students to the Gaussian School 3 weeks from tomorrow.
Good evening. I want to start off by thanking you all for allowing this program to exist. This is truly amazing. This fall alone has been enough of a journey for me to meet these 8 individual students from a completely foreign country, completely foreign land. To me, especially the language, I've been taking the language classes with a bunch of freshmen at the high school, which has been a very interesting thing all in itself, sitting in on that class. But I've really gotten to know these 8 individual students and the teacher as well. And it's been a really just a wonderful thing for me to watch them grow and watch them change throughout the past 5 months or so. And I am really excited that in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks or so, my group is going to be going and doing that exact same thing. And we have really been able to become a really close-knit group over the past couple of months. And it's going to be a wonderful trip and a great journey. And I want to thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to it, and wish us the best of health, luck, and safe travels. So thank you very much.
Great, Adam. Thank you.
Lastly, the China Exchange Program has a lot of people behind the scenes who do so many good things, and I can't thank enough both Grant Road and Judy Katz who provide a grounding and even keel and also perspective on how our program fits into the larger exchange programs and global leadership. So if I could, Grant, ask you to just come up and say a few words, and I just, a personal applause to Grant for all he's done.
Yeah, thanks to Steve and to all of you who actually have expressed over the past week, especially thanks to us and the work we've done in the program. I've been involved for about 10 years. In 2003, we had our first exchange student come from the Gaussian School and stay with us. Our daughter went in 2005. We had another exchange student with us from Xi'an as well, and have been twice to the Gaussian School. I'd like to just thank the near perfect performance of Steve and Liu Jin and Adam and all the staff members on both sides who are involved continuously in this program. Next year we'll be celebrating the 15th year of the program. So we actually have a record now in place of some things that have happened. So when I just think now about some of the graduates from Brookline who have come out of this program and what they are doing in Chinese affairs, Asian affairs, and global affairs, it's a remarkable record. And so that the power of the experience that they had when they were on this program has carried through. You know, we have cinematographers, we have architects, we have teachers and educators, we have people in medicine and in alternative medicine, we have people in security affairs, we have people in diplomacy. And so this, the importance of this program for this critical relationship between China and the United States, arguably certainly the most critical bilateral relationship in the world currently, and probably even more so over the next generation or two. The people that have come here from the Gaussian School and our people who have gone to the Gaussian School, that they will be leaders who will have had the experience of meeting face-to-face and talking, and that will shape how they think about their relationship going forward. So in the big picture, a contextual, just 2 thoughts that I have about it are that President Obama and Secretary Clinton established the 100,000 Strong Initiative in 2010, and currently we have maybe 220,000 Chinese students studying in the United States, and we have less than 20,000 Americans studying in China. So there's a disproportion. So what we're doing here is extremely important. It's been important for the last 15 years. It's probably even more important for the next 15 years. So that we have 2 adjectives, I think, that may describe what I feel about the program and what it's doing, are that it has tremendous intensity and verve. In other words, that there's more energy that comes out of the community, from the school committee, from the host families, from the school staff, that when I compare it with the other 20 bilateral sister school relationships between Massachusetts schools and Chinese sister schools, that Brookline is very strong in terms of both this vibrancy and its effectiveness. That those are two key aspects of our program, and that I think that I can see how it just grows from moment to moment because of the really the moment-to-moment actions of all the people involved. And there's so much dedication to the program on the part of the students, the teachers, the community, and all the support people. So I really thank everybody for their work in this.
Thank you for your time. Yeah, if I, okay, I've only done this for a few years now, following in Bettina Gordon's footsteps, who really laid the groundwork and foundation for the success, I feel, of our program. But I've come to learn that nothing could take place on either side of this exchange without the time and care and love of our host families. So if I could just have the host families please stand up, and we have to acknowledge them. Okay, and if anyone would like to have any words, please.
Well, I'll just say that it's this kind of program which is right down the center of the plate of one of our major objectives in our strategic plan. And it just reinforces, certainly for me, and I think for the rest of us, how important these interactions are, and what a wonderful job that you all do as a team to bring this thing together and make it work. And we thank both the Chinese host families who host our students when they go there, because when we receive them back, they have incredibly wonderful, positive stories to tell about the way they were treated there, in the same way that our Chinese friends now who are going back home have told us about the treatment that they've received here. We're very proud of it, and very interested to hear the outcomes of the students, both on this side and on your side, in terms of what they end up doing and how your lives have been changed as a result of this. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
Anybody else? We have Ms. Scotto would like to say something.
I think this, excuse me, this program is a wonderful example of the way global education can affect the school system, can affect many, many people, and can have broad-reaching effects on people's lives. I am delighted that we are bringing students from the Gaoxin School here. I know you enrich our students' school experience, not only the students who are going back to China, but everyone who comes into contact with you. So we thank you for that. For those of you going to the Gaoxin School in a few weeks, you are going to have a wonderful time. You are arriving probably just in time for Chinese New Year. You will be doing lots of traveling. It's an amazing place. And I wish you well, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you when you come back. And I'm sure so is everyone else on the school committee. Thank you.
We would love to stay, but I think the students have homework for this evening, so.
They do?
Yeah,
Steve,
do.
just real quick.
The superintendent wants to keep them here for just another moment,
Just
please.
1 minute, and I want to echo what was said here, but I particularly want to point out your excellent work. You've done an amazing job with this program since taking over from Bettina, and we so appreciate that outstanding work on behalf of our students and the students who come here from the Gaoxin School. And Grant, I just want to echo what I wrote last week. I'm sorry I was unable to be there, but to thank Grant and Judy for their amazing work and their terrific advocacy on behalf of this program. I had the opportunity to go to school with them and had an amazing experience, I will say, because of them. And there are a lot of great advocates in this town for this program. There are no greater advocates than Grant and Judy for this program, and we so appreciate it. Thank you.
Here, here. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, back to homework now, please.
Probably. Ben. Ben.
I'm going to go through the rest of the subcommittee reports first.
I was just wondering if, because it's 7, and my guess is the representative is here to.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Grant. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Enjoy your trip back. Have a great trip back, and maybe I'll see you. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye. Have a safe trip.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is that
There-
Ed would be,
Okay.
and if public comments is
Good
for
point.
7,
Good point.
you might not be, but.
Yeah, yeah. So, Ms. Coyne, it's been suggested that because we've moved things around quite a bit, we might, in case there are anybody here who would like to make public comment, we could deal with that now rather than make them wait any longer. There's no one here. I'll just ask if there's anybody out in the audience who would like to make public comment now. Representative Coppinger?
I will be quick, I promise.
How could you resist?
How could I resist? Exactly. I'm a politician, right? I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you do. Especially, I know that this wasn't an easy task to take up. And in the email I put the other night, I truly meant it. That one thing I do appreciate about Brookline is how you're always looking to run more efficient government. And I know that that was the intent when you looked at this provision change. In my mind, and I know in the minds of the people that were in attendance tonight, it was the right decision. So I just want to say thank you. And then one other, this is the first time I knew about the China Exchange program. We should host them at the State House one day. Do you know when they're going back? Huh? Do you know when the
Yeah, it's very soon.
if we could get them in the next Wednesday or two when we're in session, we could bring them up the front. They could announce, the Speaker of the House could announce them, and then maybe the 4 representatives.
Steve would be the person who's probably still.
Okay. Okay.
How are you, Tom?
Did you talk to him?
No, I didn't talk to him. Okay.
I'll go grab him.
All right. And I got to run upstairs to the ZBA now. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ditkoff. Great idea. All right, so let's go back to our subcommittee reports. And as I said at the beginning, Ms. Kershaw cannot be here tonight. She's got some big things to handle down at the State House. But we are going to hear from Dr. Lupini later in the program, and I think that he will cover, in fact, the last Finance Subcommittee meeting that we held just, I think, this past Monday, was it? Wow. A lot of water over the dam since that.
There has. And I believe the next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from Monday, is that right? January 27th, right. Right.
Yes, that's right on the calendar.
Right.
Very good.
And you're right, I will handle the substance of that meeting.
Great.
Presentation.
And Ms. Charlupski, I understand that there might be a few things you'd want to say about capital improvements.
We are really starting to move on capital.
You're humming.
improvements. We're humming, as I say. I have a number of things to report and a couple votes that we need to take. I think I'll do it with each piece that we're going to be talking about. We'll take the votes appropriately at that time. So the devotion school, as everybody knows, we have hired the firm of HMFH to be the architects for the project. Some of you have seen already the contracts here, some have not, but that's what I am going to ask for a vote to approve, and I think we need to do it as a roll call vote, just to make sure that it's legal.
Or kosher, as the case may be.
That was the word I was gonna
I
use,
knew
but
that.
I didn't think that was
So I thought I'd
exactly-
help you out, right.
So anyways, the first vote will be to approve the contract in the amount of $1,093,135 to perform the feasibility and schematic design of the devotion school. I think that amount also, if I'm not mistaken, includes the construction through the project, not just for the feasibility and schematic design. So I guess I would ask for, right, it would be for the whole contract, I mean, for the whole time period from beginning of the project till the end of the project, no?
It's feasibility and schematic.
It's,
Right.
okay,
Then the second funding is for construction documents and also includes at that time construction funding, so that sort of gets rolled up.
okay.
Right, that's down the road.
That's down the
right.
pike.
More than a year from now.
I stand corrected. Yeah, it says for performance of services required on this contract for the feasibility study phase and the schematic design phase, and excluding those services, whatever. Okay, well, for the feasibility and schematic. You all understood it very well.
And you got it right on our, you got it right on the docket, so we're all
Right.
reading the docket.
Yes, no, that's all fine. It's just in the past, we've voted the whole project usually. I don't remember it being separate, but okay.
Pre-contemporary MSBA, up until 6 years ago, or
Right,
whatever, it was different.
right. I guess for the last two projects, we've done it this way.
Yeah.
I would like to make the motion to approve this contract with HMFH in the amount that I stated.
We have a second from Ms. Stone. Is there any discussion?
I just want to say how pleased I am that we are voting on such a happy thing.
Yes.
This
is true.
That this project is moving forward, and is just seems like a, small miracle in a sea of, not quite troubles, but a sea of other somewhat more difficult decisions that we've been making, so.
In a turbulence.
So how turbulence, yes, there you go.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no discussion, we have a motion, and we have a second. May I have everybody in favor raise their hands, please?
I don't know if we need a roll call, actually, if it's unanimous.
Is there anybody opposed? Is there anybody abstaining? It is definitely unanimous.
Okay, and then we have a,
Just want to talk about the meeting process,
I-
and there's a meeting next week?
yeah, I'm not done with the votes,
Okay,
because there's a second vote.
okay.
Yes, I do. The second piece is to vote to approve the contract amendment number 1 with the same HMFH architects. This is in the amount of $106,865,000. I'm not exactly clear why we've separated this out from the full contract, however.
Well, I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, this is for geotechnical services, hazardous material services, traffic and site work, yes. Oh, and other scope changes. So that would be the second one, but maybe Mr. Pollack has the answer to the question of why it's separate.
I do. All of these services are outside of what is generally considered basic
No, you know what?
architectural
No,
engineering services.
nobody's hearing you.
All of these services, hazmat, survey, geotechnical, traffic study, are outside of what is considered basic architecture and engineering services. So there are conventions about what is expected for the services that an architect delivers, and it includes a very long list of consultants that are included in basic services, and that the architect is expected to employ and supervise and pay out of their fee. And then there are other things like checking the soils, hazardous materials, traffic study that are conventionally not included. And so all of those have been lumped into an additional services contract.
So I'm not right now seeing that second contract here, but I think we should vote it, and if it's not here, we will sign it.
I thought I saw it, but I'm not
I thought so
sure.
too,
Yeah.
but then I was looking through and I
Yeah.
don't see that, so.
Mary, are there any, so we have do we have a motion yet? And we have a second? We have a second. Thank you, Mr. Chang. Are there questions or comments? I have a question because I don't really know what a geotechnical service means in this context.
Soils. If you don't know primarily the structural capacity of the soils, the ability to hold buildings, but also water. So if you have to, stormwater needs to be infiltrated into the ground or dealt with in some other way, and it addresses that. But primarily it's for structural bearing capacity. The structural engineer can't design the building until you have the geotechnical report on the bearing capacity of the soils. So it involves digging pits with a backhoe and doing tests and things like that.
Pile driving, the extent of piles, pilings that go in, that kind of thing?
If there would be piles, there
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be I don't think there probably would be at Devotion School. You
Okay.
can probably build it on concrete spread footings.
Yep.
But I'm not sure.
Yep.
The other thing is to make sure that there's not any unforeseen conditions within the soil like we found at Runkle, with the building being there. We're hoping that's not the case, but that would be another reason to do it geotechnical.
I see. We didn't do it at Runkle?
We did.
Oh.
We just didn't do it in the right place.
I see.
We knew there was some there, but the extent was what was surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
We did do it at Runkle. It's not like we didn't. And that can happen, as with any of these hazmats, you check for asbestos and whatever other type of thing, and, you may find it, and you may hit the one place where it isn't there. So you do the best you can, and you hope.
Great. Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. We have a motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
So the other piece about devotion is that there will be a community meeting on January 23rd from 7 to 9 in the Devotion Auditorium. This is the opportunity to get input from the parents and the community, the butters, whoever's interested in the project, to come to the Devotion School. It will be mostly listening and hearing from people, hearing their hopes for the project, hearing their concerns about what exists now at Devotion and how that, what they would hope might be in the new school, and any concerns, in terms of the exterior, interior of the building, whatever. So that's for January 23rd. And I think, was there anything else? And there will be a school building committee meeting in February. I think it's the 13th, but I don't remember the exact date.
That's right.
It is? Oh, good. My mind is still good. I think, Dr. Lupini, do you have anything else to add about devotion? Okay. So that was devotion. The second contract that I think we should probably vote on, as long as we're voting on contracts, is for the electrical engineering contract for the Pierce School. As some of you may remember, there was, Pierce School needed an upgrade in their electrical system because it was so old and they couldn't find parts anymore. And so we've hired an engineering firm, Nangle Engineering, to do this upgrade, and there's a contract in the amount of $35,695 for their services. So I would move that we approve that contract.
So we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments about that contract? Seeing none, All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Once again, unanimous.
Great. So the other piece about Pierce School, if some of you may remember that we talked about that the roof on the historical building is going to be replaced this summer, a slate roof. And I'm not clear in this, I wanted to direct to Dr. Lupini whether or not the school is really aware of that, and to make sure, it seems the project's going to be done during the summer, but will probably extend into the fall, because it's not clear they could finish it all in the summer.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'll need to check with Mr. Rowe and Dr. Smith-Mumford.
Right, it's not that I'm asking whether you, I'm sort of letting you know that this is what I heard at the building commission meeting, and I wanted to make sure that our people knew what the plan was, and that this was the plan for, they're doing a number of roofs around town, but the Pierce School is the only school roof.
I was going to say, this is all part of the long-term, there's been
Correct.
roofing work across town for a couple of years now.
Roofing, envelope,
Yeah.
elevators, et cetera. That's part of that. Third item, there was a committee of 7 for the Old Lincoln School, and we chose, there were 3 presentations by 3 different firms, Arrow Street, Schwartz Silver, and Tarowski
too.
Tarowski Squared. No? Or is it 2? Whatever. They all came and presented and had very interesting ideas, actually, and examples of things they had done. It was really a very hard decision on this one. We had 10 people apply for, 10 firms apply for this project, which is, as everybody knows, a $3.5 million project. And we chose Arrow Street in the end, with Schwartz Silver second and Trotsky third. Anything else to add on that one? I don't think so. Yeah?
So, the renovations of Old Lincoln have been much talked about.
Right.
And I wondered, so we now have a contract with
Right.
a firm to design
We don't
those.
have the contract yet.
Oh, sorry, we
just chose them last week.
Okay, so you chose them.
It'll take a month to get.
They'll do proposals, sorry, I'm sorry.
We chose the architectural firm to do the whole project. They're-
Right,
Because we're.
that's right.
Yes.
Isn't that what I said? You said we have a contract. Sorry, we have an
All I was
architectural,
contracting was-
contract with an architectural firm to do a design.
No. We have selected an architectural firm. We are negotiating the
Negotiating the
contract.
contract, I'm sorry.
It's not
We have
in
settled
effect
on
yet.
who we would like to have.
Correct.
But the distinction between having chosen them and having a contract, I believe, is instrumental to the question you're about to ask.
So the question I'm about to ask is, let's see how good you are, David, is. I'm so excited. Is, what are they being contracted to do?
Oh,
What's the scope of the design?
in the RFP, it was stated that it would be for upgrades to electrical, for taking care of the garage, for the bathrooms that would be ADA. One of the things that they pointed out actually at the, when we were having the interviews, is that this may, because the amount that we are putting into the building is so low, it won't trigger ADA requirements. So there are some upgrades that we would want to do, but some that we might not have to. Okay, and a science room,
And one's,
one side.
one science
Extra, well, there is one there.
Right, okay.
So
And
upgrading
it's
that.
not- Oh, it's being upgraded, and that's being upgraded?
Yeah, I mean, I
at the,
think-
At the middle school level? I mean,
Yeah,
the
that's
science
the-
room for.
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's what happened, is the building commission and the school department understanding the time constraints of having a school ready to be opened for the 15-16 school year.
and how tight that time frame would be, decided that to put the selection process of a qualified school renovation architect in parallel with the school department's work of developing the program. And the RFP to the architects we got the 10 responses and now we've ranked the 3, basically said that there are 2 clients, the school department and the building department, and there's a lot of infrastructure needs to the building, and there are also programmatic needs. And it outlined both of those. But at this point, it's really, the school department is sort of coming to, in the final process of refining their program, and that's sort of kind of coming together right at the same time as the need to negotiate a contract with the architect. So we have not heard from the school department yet about precisely what the plans are for the building, and in any case, there's some aspirational aspect for each client. The school department, I'm sure, has a whole lot of things there's some things they need to do and some things they would like to do, and the same with the building department in terms of new electrical and whatever all those things are. So we will learn more soon, I think. Bill, do you want to?
Next Thursday.
So
That's at the
Capital
Capital Subcommittee.
Subcommittee.
Right.
I just want to
next
suggest that this is a good thing, that
Yes.
what you're describing is that the architects upon whom we have settled but not yet negotiated the contract are aware of, are very aware that when they were bidding on the contract, they were made aware that they would be working very closely in concert with the administration so that the effect of the renovations does what we need them to do. And that will be developed. And that's terrific. I think that would be very reassuring to a lot of the people who have been hearing, on the one hand, we're doing this, and on the other hand, there's a plan that hasn't yet been formed. I think that we should be attempting to talk about
All
it
that
as.
will start to
Right.
come together at our next.
That's right. And to be fair, we've actually been talking about this fairly regularly with the building department. So,
As I would
Yeah, sure.
expect, but when we meet as a group to talk about it, I think it's important that all, because it does, if you just hear about the little pieces.
Right.
You know, if you're at an oversight study committee meeting, or if you're at a subcommittee meeting, for us, you hear a small piece of it, and I think it's important that we knit it together and demonstrate that it's being quite deliberately done that way, that
Right.
we're not gonna have to pull something out of a hat, that this is moving forward in a deliberative and integrated fashion. I think that's very, very positive.
Okay.
And is the amount of capital that's going to be devoted, is that a fixed amount now, or is that subject to some review?
My understanding is it's 3.5 million, and there's a $500,000 for something that's in another budget that I can't remember what it's.
I don't know.
For the garage?
Not for the garage. There was a $500,000 for something else. I want to say like roof repair maybe, or envelope. No, not
I thought it was for the garage, but at any rate, it's somewhere.
Well, that's the
There
half
are
of the-
fixed,
yeah.
the question is there any decision-making about the available funds that needs to be done? And
Yes.
our understanding is no, there's a fixed budget.
It's 3 plus a half, it's not 3.5 plus a half.
I'm not sure which.
I thought it was.
I believe it's 3.5.
I think it's
I could be wrong, but I
Total.
believe it's 3.5.
In the CIP, there was another $500,000 for something at.
There may be, and that would,
To the 3.5. So you're saying it's 4?
You know what, let's hold that. I will look again at the CIP, and we can talk about it at Capital. 3.5
Very
for
good.
sure, and it's a tight budget, to
Yep.
answer your question. Very tight.
Yeah, just, it might be obvious from last evening's meeting, but you might expect company next Thursday morning.
Yes, I've had 2 inquiries already
Yes, yes.
as a result of last night.
Moved the meeting so that we could be a little more comfortable into this room as opposed to our, because I realized that was going to be happening.
Yep.
The other piece, well, the meeting that we're talking about, the Capital Subcommittee meeting, will be meeting at 8 o'clock on the 23rd, 8 to 10. We will be starting on time for anybody who is not on the committee and wants to come, just so that you know, because we need both Dr. Lupini and I have to go to an EDCO board meeting at 10:30. And we have a very, very, probably too long agenda, but we will attempt to do what we can with it. And Old Lincoln School is one of the issues that are on there.
You say that's on Friday?
No?
Thursday.
Thursday. Thursday, the 23rd
Oh.
of January at 8 o'clock here in the school committee room. Unless,
And
any-
just so people know, the Overhead Study Committee Capital Subcommittee canceled its meeting, which conflicted with that, in
Oh.
order to bring its minions to your meeting.
I'm very pleased. I've been attending their meetings. Now they can come to our meetings and we can talk together.
And that meeting's starting at 8 o'clock, is that correct?
Correct. It's starting at 8 o'clock here in this room. I don't know if there's anything else that I left out. There are just a few little minor things. Heath School is finally finishing out. A lot of these projects, as you may know, takes a while till all the bills come in, till everything's settled, till, there are punch list items, et cetera. So it looks, what Ray was saying is that Heath School is what am I saying? That Heath School is closing out at this point. The Driscoll School Statement of Interest, I think, will be starting up somewhat in the near future. Maybe you could speak to that, Dr. Lupini?
We're dealing with the statement of interest issue, trying to ascertain whether we have because the question's been posed, whether we have the ability to submit two together. We believe that we do, although we're still working on that, although we do need to designate a priority among the two, between the two, excuse me. So that's in process.
And lastly, Dr. Lupini and I are going to be taking two people from the MSBA to visit our Heath School and Runkle School, so hopefully we can show off a little bit, also a good thing. They had we had talked about inviting them, and they followed up on it, so we're quite excited. Yes?
Is that staff or board members?
It's staff.
Staff.
Yes.
What's the MSBA?
Oh, thank you.
Good for you, Jonathan.
It's the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They're the group that, if we want to work with the state and receive funding from the state for any school buildings that we do, we need to work with them. And we have done that both on, they participated financially and in other ways on the Runkle School and also on the Heath School, and will be participating, we hope, fully on the Devotion School and the other ones that we have coming along the way.
Thank you.
It's a really high-grade, very professional organization.
That, I think, is all I have to say. I think so.
Thank you, Ms. Jalopsky. We're going to have to pay you overtime. Yes. Yes. Okay. Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
I'm very short and to the point. Our curriculum subcommittee meeting for next week has been canceled for the 21st. We were supposed to meet on Tuesday. We will be meeting instead probably sometime early in February to look at the high school catalog course changes. The other thing is, we have,
There's a meeting, sorry. It says curriculum subcommittee meeting 4:45. That's the school improvement plan?
right, there's a school, that's
For
what I
next
was just
meeting.
about to
Right,
say.
right,
That's
okay.
not what I'm canceling. I'm canceling
Okay, that's fine.
the one on the 21st.
Thank you, sorry.
I mean, there's like a 10:30 meeting. Is that the one you're
The
talking?
10:30 one I'm canceling.
Okay.
We will still be meeting for the school improvement plans at 4:45 next Thursday. It's not next Thursday.
it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks, 2 weeks. Yes, and other than that, there is nothing. Yes.
Just curious, but what are the high
Sorry.
school course catalog changes?
We haven't received them yet,
Oh, so, okay.
so I don't know
But
what they
there
are.
will be some.
There will be some. I think it's the addition only of a couple of courses, but I'm not clear on, at this point, what they will be.
That happens every year, Jonathan. There's the course catalog is reviewed, new teachers that want to offer new courses, bring them here, and it's a standard thing in anticipation of putting out new courses to the students.
And how often are the course suggestions or additions approved?
Yearly.
Yearly.
They're reviewed with the administrative staff by the headmaster, or proposals come to the administrative team at the high school. They're reviewed. Some are recommended on. They're then reviewed by the senior staff here, and those recommendations that survive to that point are recommended onto the school committee.
And so you'll get the detail on those this year.
We'll want your opinion.
But
Yes, Ms. Chalupsky.
in the past, these have usually been recommended in December, so that it could,
They've been recommended during a number of years, they've been recommended in January, but that had more to do with the publishing of the book. We were
Yes.
working against the publishing deadline. We're not working against that publishing deadline because of the fact that the course catalog is put online, and it's done in other ways now, so we don't have that artificial deadline to deal with.
so when do students pick their courses for next year?
Not in February.
Oh, okay. I thought that was when that usually happens.
No.
That's why I'm confused.
Yeah, so we do have time.
Okay. Ms. Stone, negotiations. Oh, I'm sorry, government relations, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I have anything to report. Have we been, we have not been here since the legislative breakfast?
No. Right.
Man, oh man, time does
Yep.
fly. It was so nice to see Representative Cottinger tonight because he was unable to join us for the legislative breakfast, which I will have to rely on my colleagues to tell me whether it went well. I thought it was a good discussion. I thought Senator Cream, who was put in the hot seat because she was the only full member of the delegation who was actually able to join us that day after a series of unforeseen cancellations that were all quite legitimate. I thought we got a really good set of really good information from her. I thought that the staff members who joined us were helpful, and I also thought more than anything else that it was tremendously helpful for the people around the table, including the staff members and the senator, but also our colleagues from the town side, to hear the nature of the conversations that we were having around those very large and crucial issues that may directly affect what we are trying to do to get at some very big problems. In fact, one of them came up at the Override Study Committee last night. Members were asking about the health insurance. And Dr. Lupini was able to report that that was the only thing the Override Study Committee did not get told last night, which I thought was important, is that legislation was introduced in the last legislature by our representatives at our request, and has been reintroduced in this legislature. And so it's not a small matter to tell the Override Study Committee and others that contacting their local representatives about moving that forward would be tremendously helpful. But I was grateful that the superintendent had a chance to talk about the MASS, his efforts with MASS to get them in back of it. And I think that's mostly what we heard from our legislators that morning, was that the efforts that we have been making towards that piece of legislation and in terms of gathering support among our colleague institutions, school committees, and among our other related associations like MASS and Mass Municipal, can only be good for the progress of those initiatives. We did talk about the difficult conversations we've been having here in Brookline about budgets, but also about the enrollments and the pressure on. We were able to talk to the legislators about the conversations that we had at this committee just last year around things like full-day kindergarten, and the consequences, which they don't get to hear or see very often, I think, of they make budget decisions about whether or not to put a certain amount of money in things like the kindergarten grants. I think it's really, really important for them to come and talk to us and hear that forced a conversation about charging for full-day kindergarten, the implications of that for the kindergarten experience, which of course is an ongoing conversation in town as we continue to look at these enrollment issues and operating budget issues. So I thought it was a great conversation, and I hope we will be able to follow up, in particular with Representative Sanchez's office. We were invited to go talk to him directly, and looking forward to doing that.
Ms. Chalupsky.
Just one other thing to add. The EDCO Legislative Forum has been scheduled for March 27th at the State House.
Right.
From 9:30 to 11:30. Did it get out to everybody?
Yes, Colleen.
Yeah, she sent
she
it to
sent
everybody?
it.
I didn't know everybody had gotten it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, Ms. Chalupsky, you'll be going, and
But I would hope other people would go too.
You want other people to
Oh,
go?
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
No, this is for us, and actually in the past, the town administrator has attended, and sometimes the advisory committee, and the, help me, who else, Bill? Or Rebecca?
Advisory?
And, yeah, I think.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I put it down because it came up, but I don't know anything about the logistics, where it's going to be held.
It's usually in the members' chamber, but that'll come out. There'll be a official invitation and stuff, and
Okay.
we will make sure, actually, all our legislators now know, because I actually got back to them through the emails. When I'd asked them about the date, they emailed me, so except for Mike Moran, actually. I didn't remember.
Should we be forwarding that invitation to the town meeting members list?
I don't think so. The
No?
room isn't that big.
Okay.
The room is not that big, so I think we have to limit it to advisory committee. Maybe the select might want to come.
What about the override study committee?
The chairs of the override study committee.
Sure.
I think, or maybe the school chair might be somebody who would be interested. But I would try and be sort of
selective.
You're not trying to whip up a huge crowd.
And we're not trying to whip up a huge crowd, but we do want people there, so, and all school committee members are invited.
Okay.
I did want to say that, Dr. Lupini, I know that we are planning to send follow-up thank you letters to our legislators, but there was a matter of an attachment from Dr. Fisher-Mueller. I don't know whether that's, oh, sorry, you are here. I'm sorry. Did you send that to me?
You should have received it. We have it. We prepared it.
Okay, I'm sorry. If it got buried in my email, I will take a look. I'm sorry.
No, it may not have
It's
been
there.
sent. I will double check.
Dr. Fisher-Mueller was excellent at the legislative breakfast in terms of outlining, as she has before, the growth in particular of mandated programs and the impact that that's had on our system. Again, another thing that I don't believe our legislators ever see lined up in quite that effective a manner, and it was both a terrific piece of work that we all got to see, but really, really effective to be able to share that with our legislators. I think it really brought home a message that is difficult for them to hear the rest of the time. So thank you, Dr. Fisher-Mueller, for your contributions also at the breakfast.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Now, negotiations.
We have received a request to negotiate from the BEU, so we will be pursuing that with the committee, and hope to have the negotiating team meet to discuss that before we talk to the full committee about it. But we are proceeding as as we normally do in response to that. And that is all I have for negotiations.
That's enough.
Policy, happily, we've already covered.
Yes, we have. Override Study Committee, Ms. Ditkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're almost a half an hour behind schedule, I will be brief, which is that many of you, I think, if not all of you, were at the Override Study Committee meeting last night when report outs were provided from each of the subcommittees. If you weren't there, most, if not all, of those reports will be online on the Override Study Committee website in the next 24 hours. We're also coming up with a list of potential issues, a list of issues that are under consideration by the Override Study Committee for recommendation to the various bodies, including this body. And so the public hearing will be, as I said, next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock in the Selectmen's Conference Room. The one thing I will say is that the list of issues is, the good news is that it's weighted between the schools and the town side of things. But clearly there are a number of issues on there that are policy, that will involve policy recommendations. So I do urge each of you to attend, and to whatever extent there are questions in the community about it, encourage members of the community to attend, because a number of those issues are things we've been talking about, but are going through the Override Study Committee process right now. So, so that's it, unless there are specific questions. The only other piece that was discussed at the Override Study Committee was a bridge budget concept, which is proceeding in parallel to the Override Study Committee report. And I'll stave on that because I think the superintendent's going to talk a little bit more specifically about that tonight.
Correct. Great, thank you very much. And I want to apologize to everybody. This afternoon, I sent you really a first draft of proposed remarks that I'm going to make at the at that public hearing, and it's subject to review by all and change as you wish. I will take either suggestions now. I have a feeling there are a few already. I want to thank Ms. Stone, Ms. Ditkoff, and Ms. Cox, although she's not here. All of you have made a contribution to the resulting draft, but it's going to change some more. And if anybody wants to make suggestions now, that would be great. It's the only time that we can discuss it together because this is the only meeting before the testimony has to be made. So you're all also welcome to send me any suggestions you have individually, but we can't discuss them as a group. So, and I apologize again for not having given you more time, but actually already some of the remarks that were made last night at the Override Study Committee meeting are incorporated in this particular draft. Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was paying close attention last night because I knew that the Override Study Committee members would give us at least something to refer back to, and Kevin Lang never disappoints. So. But I did want to say I think this is a terrific statement about where we are, and certainly reflects the concerns that we raised in the last Finance Subcommittee meeting extremely well. Listening to the Override Study Committee last night, I was really struck by, as I have been before, but it's sort of cohering in my head now, about something that I find puzzling, which is that there seems to be a sense that I get through the questions of the Override Study Committee and some of their statements that, and I hear this reflected in part in some of the things that get said in the community about this whole process, and comes back to the B-Space work, that I get this sense that we feel as a school committee a lot more commonality with the questions and concerns that are being raised at the Override Study Committee than than they think we have, that they see this as talking to a school committee that may or may not have considered these things. There seems to be a sense that, why would you not have done this? It seems like you never even considered X, Y, or Z, and therefore we have to somehow force you to consider X, Y, or Z. And whenever I hear those, I think we have been talking about almost all of these issues, including the very difficult ones, some of the very more difficult ones that have been raised by the Override Study Committee and raised by members of the community for many years. And so I'm hoping that I would like to take another look at this. I think this is an important opportunity for the school committee to make a very public statement, which we don't often get a chance to do with a lot of people listening, at least not in real time, about how much we agree with the nature of the challenge, that we are at a certain point, we have done a lot has changed, but that we are not going to get out of this without making difficult decisions. We are not going to get out of this without challenging some long-standing assumptions. And while those are very difficult to do, I think it's important that the school committee in its statement both show that we're really on the same page. We are not being forced against our will to consider these things. We talked about full-day kindergarten and charging for it last year. We have made policy changes to increase class sizes. We have talked with our legislators year after year after year about the difficulty of going on supporting programs in our schools that do not receive the kind of support that they need from the state for us to be able to make the case, even though we are so sure of their benefits to the school system, that those are conversations we have, that we will continue to have, and that we are very willing to have with the community and with the Override Study Committee. So I don't think that gets into statements like this enough. It tends to feel like we're just saying we're in trouble and we need the town to back us. I think we need to establish more common purpose with those folks, and so I'd like to see whether that's possible without making it way too long.
You're hired. Yes, Ms. Cotto. Thank you, Ms. Stone. I agree with your points, and it's very helpful. And everybody understands that, so we will, of course, I will share a draft with everyone with whatever changes are suggested amongst us, but I am going to speak on behalf of the school committee as a whole, very definitely, unless you all disagree.
Just to follow what Rebecca has said, one of the things that I have read this very quickly. I wasn't home when it came this afternoon, and as you know, I came late, so I've just sat here and skimmed it, so I could be missing something. But a lot of the things that are on the table for the Override Study Committee that we have considered, we have rejected because they are not educationally sound, or that there are educational reasons for continuing them, good, solid reasons based on our understanding of what is good for students in the schools. And I think that in some place needs to be in here, that many of the things that are under consideration are things that we have already considered, but feel that it is not in the best interest of the quality of education of our. It's not that considering them is fine, but that if we were to implement those changes, it would deeply affect the quality of education in the town. And in the first paragraph here, you say it is the consensus of the school committee that it will not be possible to sustain the quality of our program. I think we should say that we have already made changes that are affecting the quality of our program, and deeper cuts will make it not possible to continue a high cost. I'm not wording it well, but something that says that we already feel that our quality has been compromised, and deeper cuts will make the situation even worse. Because partly, I think this sounds as if we don't do what's on the table now, we will affect the quality of education. But we have not kept up, for example, in support staff, and that does have its effect and has had its effect already. So I'm just hoping that we can make a stronger statement.
Okay, do you want to chat with me or with Rebecca? Okay. Oh, you're very kind, Ms. Scotto. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Dickoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not surprisingly, I agree with both of my colleagues. I think that the long-standing nature of these conversations at the school committee level is really important to reinforce, that we have discussed them for some time, and there have been public hearings on them in the past. For example, full-day kindergarten has gone through a set of public hearings. We'll go through it again, but this isn't the first time it's coming up. So I think that's important to reinforce, that this is a continuation of conversations, and we're again, happy to hear from the community about priorities, but this is a continuation in a longer stream, and that these conversations have not only been occurring, but choices are being made that are affecting it. So class size is increasing by some number; it's creeping up by some number. The ratios of student supports have changed by some number. They are creeping up. We are carving out suboptimal classrooms. So it's not only have we been discussing them, but actions have been taken that we are tacitly and explicitly approving, that are actually making I don't want to say progress because it's going backwards, but it is moving forward some of these ideas and beyond conversation into, given the budget pressures. So I guess it's not only that the conversations are continuing, but that there have been specific actions, and I think all of that is to say that, and at the same time, that significant efficiencies, true efficiencies, have been gained, which is again separate but important as program cuts. And so I think the question is that we really do see this as a revenue question to maintain the same level of services or try to restore things we feel like have been chipped away. At the same time, we understand that the revenue levels that we're talking about are somewhat substantial, and that no one's getting out of this room without further programmatic cuts, but we don't believe there are significant efficiencies that are being left on the table. So to the extent we in the first instance, we believe it's a revenue problem. The fact that those revenues may not be available or may be at such a high level that the community is unwilling to support it may necessarily mean that we are needing to make further trade-offs and continue these discussions, but no one is sort of under the illusion that we're not talking about quality cuts, right, or quality changes or changes in the characteristics and the nature of the program. So anyway, I'm sure you can make all that sound much better.
Do my best.
Thank you.
Okay. Enough said. And we'll welcome, both Ms. Stone and I will welcome any additional suggestions for those who haven't had a chance to read the document yet. Thank you. Are there any additional liaisons? Yes. Mr. Chang.
I actually have one question for Ms. Dickoff in terms of process with regards to the recommendation that ultimately emerges from the different subcommittees. What is the process and what is the roadmap, and what level of public discourse and debate will go into this before something is produced?
So I think that let me start by taking a half a step back and reiterate that there are two parallel tracks. One is the town administrator and the superintendent coming up with a bridge budget under certain parameters, and that will be developed and delivered by the February 12th meeting that we're having.
But that's just for 1 year.
I understand. That's right.
Yeah.
But so
That's not, just to be clear, that's not an override study committee
product.
Correct. No, that's what I'm saying. So that is one track. The second track is the override study committee needing to quote unquote come up with a recommendation for FY15 by March 1st. So if you put those two things together, you know, if in fact that bridge is being built and it's wide enough and sturdy enough and everyone is can walk across it, then the immediate need for a March 1st recommendation from the override study committee, it has direct implications for the roadmap, is my point. So the selectmen to date have not changed the charge of the override study committee. It is still to produce a recommendation by March 1st for an FY15 implication. That said, I think where we all are trying to go is that last night was about a first look out at the analyses. The public hearing will be a chance for the public to weigh in on a host of issues, and I hope people who are interested do weigh in. I think we've heard a lot from the B-Space process and other processes in town that people felt like some voices were heard, not other voices, and so this is kind of the come one, come all, make your voice heard sort of moment. After next Wednesday, there will be at least 2 and potentially more meetings where there may feel more like workshops in format to go through the subcommittee recommendation reports and turn them, with the benefit of the analysis of the subcommittee, the benefit of the public comment, into something that looks like an emerging recommendation. And I think the goal of those would be to say essentially, you know, number one, we think that there are short-term important implications that should be seized immediately. So for example, parking meters is the one that came up multiple times last night, it's short-term in nature, the dollars are real, it should get incorporated ASAP. My guess is that there'll be some number of significant policy issues about which the committee will deliberate and ultimately it will vote as a committee of 15 voting members and 2 non-voting co-chairs to say, do we or do we not as a committee recommend that the school committee re-examine its policy on X, that the town re-examine its policy on Y, that the such and such department implement Z, whatever that is, they make a set of recommendations that then go to the various town departments. And then I suspect there'll be some other basket of issues, since I'm not allowed to use the word bucket anymore, I will put things in baskets, that there'll be another set of issues which is more long-term in nature. For example, the capital subcommittee will come up with a model that says there's a bunch of stuff that's known and a bunch of stuff that's unknown. You know, Devo at $110 million maybe is a more solid number than a black box number for the Driscoll project or a black box number for the high school project, but either way, here's more or less a range. And as those numbers come in over the course of the next 12, 24, 36 months, that model continues to get refined. It doesn't mean the committee needs to meet that entire time, but it does need to sort of at least tie it up and put a bow on it is the phrase we were using last night, and say, here's the best model we have, here are the placeholders we have. We would encourage the school department, building department, whomever, to update this as they go and continue to calculate these numbers. And so that set of recommendations might be longer term in nature. So I think that's what we're trying to grapple with, which is what of these recommendations are kind of ready to go soon, and which ones are kind of longer term policy things, and then which ones are they're just unknown, and you kind of have to live with that and have a basic sense of what the parameters are, but you're not going to have that information for some time.
Right, so it's not like on March 1st, we're going to have a grand design as to what this thing's going to look like.
Correct.
But rather, would you say that the gating factor around that in terms of some of the low-hanging fruit we could use in terms of recommendations, and also being able to really have sufficient time to vet out, because March 1st is 5 weeks away? 6 weeks away, is that if the bridge budget is in better shape and there's buy-in from all parties, does that provide us longer runway to, spend more time to thoughtfully examine all the implications?
Right, and last night, I mean, there was a question about class size. If the override study committee wanted to vote to, and no one was suggesting that this was going to happen, but were it to suggest that class size should be increased,
how quickly could the school committee jump on that? Could they jump on it quickly enough to incorporate it into an FY15 budget? My contention was that just because the Override Study Committee had recommended it doesn't mean that the school committee still had its process to go through in terms of policy and I think that if we were to change our policy, we would have to have our own hearings. So I think some of these things just have a longer runway. The only reason I would caution against the word quick hit is that I think there are some things in there which are short term in nature, or low hanging fruit. I think that there are people who are on the other side of those decisions who would consider them, they would deeply, that would deeply impact their wallet. So for example, if we are to suggest an increase to the BEEP fee, if we are to change the policy about extended day, if we are to start renting out our gyms, there are people on the other side of those decisions who might not appreciate the term, not that you meant this, but the low hanging fruit. So I think I would say shorter term, easier to perhaps easier to implement, and not necessarily requiring significant policy change or debate. We can come up with some language about what those things are, which does not preclude, as you said, the whole other set of things that actually does require a thoughtful deliberative process, and that may or may not be ready for a fiscal 15 and likely will not be ready for fiscal 15 implementation.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
The point is, we're going to have enough time to make the decisions we need to make.
Yep.
At least I don't see any way to not design it that way, unless someone else thinks. Is that a fair characterization? I'm kind of making this up, but that's sort of my sense of where the conversation has been and is going.
We will have the time to make the decisions.
The school committee.
We
We will take the time we need.
Exactly, because, it's easy to be armchair quarterbacks. So, anyway.
Well, just to that point, one second, just to that point, I'm sorry, 'cause I'm making this problem worse. But we just this morning in Capitol, the Override Study Committee Capitol discussion, I'll just give one very small example without replaying the whole thing. There was a question of, can we compare classroom savings that you get by increasing class size, how many classrooms you reduce if you increase the number of kids per class. Can you compare that to the class savings you would get if you took certain populations out of our school system, METCO and materials fee? And the answer was, if you're only looking at it apples to apples in terms of classrooms, the answer may be yes. You're increasing class size, you need fewer classrooms. METCO materials fee, you're reducing the number of classrooms. However, that is not the full capital picture, because if you are increasing class size, you still have the same number of children in the building, and so you still need to expand common spaces. Lawrence still needs to push its cafeteria into the hallway if you are just increasing class size. So there are capital expenditures that still go into effect. There are operating expenditures like guidance counselors, nursing, all those classroom supports. So you you capture some savings, but not others. So it's not that a classroom is a classroom is a classroom. Right. And I think it's down at that level of detail where it is very easy to see a facile comparison when in fact the cost savings that they may or may not calculate, we were encouraging them, I think, to at least put a factor on for that, because the financial implications, if an Override Study Committee is trying to make a recommendation to an organization like the school committee that has to look at the full picture, they can't just, take a couple of, again, low-hanging fruit, quick hits out of context without looking at the full implications. So anyway, that's one example. Trust me, there were many others, which I will not go through, but that's the level of conversation that we are encouraging the Override Study Committee to have before recommendations come to us, so that we don't have to do that work. And false bogey numbers don't get put out unhelpfully to the community that set up false expectations of savings that don't actually exist when you play it out. Does that make sense?
It does.
So, sorry for the long-winded answer, Mr. Chairman, and everyone
Depressing.
else still here.
So, okay.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Pollock? We're running late. I will just remind people, yeah.
At the risk of staying kind of down in the weeds, but just on this one particular, set me straight if this was further discussed, because I left the meeting about halfway through, or I don't know whether you guys had sleeping bags last night. But what I heard, the one sort of, as you said, number, the way you just described them, I can't remember, but that can't be delivered, that I found sort of alarming in the first, in the part of the meeting, was the suggestion that because our average class size is 21, and the policy is higher, that there is some, that the administration is working to a lower number than the policy, whereas my understanding is that the 21 is the practical expression of filling up classes all the way to the limit and then wherever possible. And it's only that the wherever possible, so that because I heard someone distinctly say that going from 21 average to 23 would not require a policy change. Whereas I think that the administration is really pushing them, because we have more classrooms with 24 students than any other number. That's the peak of the bell curve. And then after that, 23, and then 25. So we're actually, or maybe not 20, maybe it's 21, and then 25. But we have more 23s and 24s than anything else, even though the average is 21. We would, my understanding is that we would have to actually change the policy to effectively implement this. Because I heard someone on the Override Study Committee say it wouldn't require a policy change because you could go for, because 23 is just what they thought would be a practical limit if the policy is 24.
Well, it's, so first of all, it's a budget guideline piece, not a policy. And it's been stated at that table a number of times as that the range is 22 to 24. That's actually not accurate. You've asked us over time to keep the primary levels at 22 or below, and to go up to 24, 25 at the intermediate levels. So 22 to 24 actually misrepresents the issue. The thing that, I wasn't going to say anything, but the thing I find most alarming about this conversation is that about this particular piece is that a conversation about an average is actually the wrong way to talk about this. The right way to talk about it from our perspective, and we actually went through this today and tested it out again, is about the range. So an average creates a range. So you remember that a statement was made last night that last year we did well in assigning students. I've heard that a number of times through this. And the way I interpret that is that that means we had a tight range, right? So we have an average of 21 students, and we have a range of 19 to 23. That's what our current kindergarten looks like. The statement's been made that the year before, we didn't do a good job of assigning students. That's been said a number of times. And that range, if you look at them now as first graders, the average is essentially the same. But the range is 16, and I want to come back to that, to 24. And the problem with that statement is that it lacks a fundamental piece of information, which is that 16 is the 16 because of the size of a classroom. One of those unacceptable classrooms, by the way.
Suboptimal.
Suboptimal, thank you. It's 16 for that reason. There's a 17 as well, but that's a 17 that started the year at 20 and dropped because of students leaving at one school. So if you say you can take 21 to 23, then you're accepting that in kindergarten a range of 21 to 25 is acceptable in a good, tight year. In a year that's not so tight, what you're saying is that a range of somewhere in the neighborhood of 21 to 26 would be acceptable to you. And I'm wondering if we would be having the same conversation if we were talking about that range instead of talking about an average. So that's the issue.
And the frequency number.
Right, and the frequency of those sections plays into that as well, because you're right, in that kindergarten number, if you just look at kindergarten this year, the major number is 22 and 23. Right, that's the number that's there most often in terms of those ranges. So, I think there's some difficulty to that conversation when people are talking about an average, because the average isn't really the issue we should be addressing.
And, and we could be a lot clearer about raising the average and capping,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So we will raise the policy, and the policy not policy, guideline, whatever the word is.
Right.
And we will cap at a number that we don't currently cap at.
Sure.
And whether or not we achieve that average, we achieve or don't achieve because of the cap. So
Right.
there are other ways to.
But you can't then go forward and make a budget assumption that you're going to cut 2 sections a year as a result of that.
Absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
right, that's the point.
If everything aligns.
Well, again, you know, I mean, at one meeting where the statement was made that we did a good job one year, and I said, thank you, I think, but that really has more to do with where people moved than my expertise at assigning. It really does. I mean, I think we do a good job within the buffer zones. I think we do a good job at honoring requests. I think we do a good job, if you look at these last 2 or 3 years, we do a good job of keeping numbers tightly grouped around whatever that average ends up being. But quite frankly, we're at the mercy of where people move and in some cases, in some schools, how late they move. And that's why you'll see more fluctuation at a Devotion and at a Baker than you see at schools that have that don't have as many buffer zones and/or that have an earlier registration pattern.
And again, I think I would just reiterate that some members of the Override Study Committee are proposing that the way you can increase that flexibility is by, in a sense, reducing the quality of service that's provided to the families.
That's right.
So for example, pushing out an enrollment date or a notification date, if you
Assignment
let
date.
people, an assignment date, sorry, if you let people know later in the process what kindergarten their child's going to be going to, you can increase your flexibility for assignment. If you, for example, do not honor parent requests for for school assignments,
right.
you can increase that flexibility. And I think that what the Override Study Committee is essentially, what certain members are saying is that that set of decisions, that set of services is simply too expensive for us right now. It is simply too expensive to provide that level of service to Brookline families. And I think then that's something that we
Right. The
can have
third
a
I want to
discussion
add to that is really around when we do the kindergarten orientation programs. It's been suggested to me that if we pushed it into the summer, that we could achieve an efficiency in terms of assignment because we wouldn't need to assign as early. So if you take those three pieces, not dealing at all with requests, not making assignments till the latest date possible, and moving your registration, I mean, all of those, of course, are technical possibilities, right? And they all have something to do with the quality of the program that we offer that we to date have not found to be acceptable in terms of that programming. And I would hope would continue not to find acceptable.
Ms. Shalomsky, we are way, I just want to say we're way behind. No, I mean, we're all making it worse, me included. But I think unless,
Just one small little piece, and I will be quick, not to belabor the point about that, moving it to the summer, but then you don't know how many kids you have registering. So it's like, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Excuse me.
okay.
I appreciate the indulgence of the chair. Since there isn't going to be a public hearing this, I expect
Right.
a number of people will be getting these questions, so thank you
Right.
for your indulgence
Right.
in our late hour.
It's always my pleasure. I think we're ready for our student report. Mr. Yu? Oh, I'm sorry. Say again? Oh, a liaison. Yes, I did ask if there were any other liaison. You're right.
We went off in another
Yes.
direction.
Yes, Mr. Chang, it was all your fault.
Yeah.
Right.
Monday night, I attended the Brookline Education Foundation meeting, and I have to say it is such a pleasure to go to that meeting. It is a room full of people who want to raise money to improve the Brookline school system. What more could you ask than that? They had just gotten back their responses to the Idea Lab application. That is the fall program where they ask teachers who would like to get some funds for a project to come in and sell their idea in a 10-minute, with a 10-minute presentation. And one of the comments that was made was that the majority of the people who applied were interested in technology in some way or the other. And the conversation moved around in this meeting to the fact that the Brookline Education Foundation has a great deal of information about the kinds of things that teachers are asking for and the kinds of interest, the kind of interest there is in various uses of technology in the classroom. And it was a lively conversation, And I think they are contemplating speaking at the public hearing, not as an advocate of anything, but as a provider of information about the kind of interest in technology that teachers have and their interest in professional development for technology. So they may be a speaker at the hearing, again, not advocating for anything, but presenting some of the information they've gathered over the years.
Based on the current text, I've said that the teachers are looking for.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Chang.
I was able to attend Human Relations Youth Resource first meeting of the year last night, and I'm happy to report that the selectmen has filled the 7 vacant seats of the commission. So I'm assuming that in our next meeting on the 19th of February, we'll have quorum. And also at the same time, there was quite a bit of discussion about the Override Study Committee and the vulnerability of MECO program in those discussions. There were definitely very impassioned discussion that MECO was very important, and we had, what's her name? Enid Shapiro, who was one of the original persons of MECO in Belmont. She spoke passionately about how important that is, and I think we have some powerful friends that will be supporting us around MEDCO.
It's nothing like a public hearing. Any other liaisons? Hearing none. Mr. Yu, would you like to make your report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, finally.
I'm taking that back.
First, I'd like to thank, a little bit overdue, but I'd like to thank Mr. Lupini on behalf of my colleagues who are very grateful for the snow day at the beginning of the new year. Lots of...
I noticed you didn't thank me for having school on that Thursday, though.
Thank you for that, too. Many grateful posts on social media that Friday. All right, so a quick update about things that have been going on at the high school. We had Needs Improvement put on a benefit performance for the Brookline Food Pantry last Friday. And if any of you know Needs Improvement, it's a student improv group. The kids are different every year, but you're guaranteed to have a good time if you go. Good times. Revisions is happening tonight and tomorrow, I believe in Tappan Gym. And that's a student variety show, you know, lots of great talent. You have to, students who want to participate have to audition. Also, you know, a wonderful display of student talent. Today was the MLK Day assembly, you know, so everyone in the school pretty much came together, you know. And there were performances by the Samba group, the Samba drumming group, the combined choruses, of which I am a part, the slam poetry team, which I believe is new this year, or relatively new. And then, of course, speeches by various students. And I thought it was really meaningful, you know, because we don't often get to discuss these issues. And just hearing about what the students had to say and their experiences, you know, on the sojourn, you know, the trip to the South, that all meant a lot to me. Let's see. Second quarter is ending and midterms are coming up. Probably not that important to you guys. There will be a bullying assembly the day after midterms. So that's something I'm looking forward to. I think, you know, bullying again is an issue we don't speak often enough of, you know, and even if the students, you know, such as myself, even if I don't experience it, you know, it's a reality for students across the nation, so it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. the annual Lunar New Year celebration is happening sometime at the end of the month, and that's when the Xi'an exchange students will officially be sent off, and there will be live entertainment in the atrium, lion dances, songs and games, and food. So that usually attracts lots of people, and it's a good opportunity to celebrate culture and diversity at Brookline High School. Now for some updates from student governance. School committee, student council is working on a mascot. I believe I updated you possibly on this last time. We have narrowed it down to 2 choices, which Ms. Holman has approved, and we will unveil those in the February Sagamore. They are the Spartan and the Revolutionary War Hero, and we will be having 2 members of student council writing about why they prefer one or the other. And it'll be kind of, we're trying to generate discussion. We're considering putting up posters or even response boards, around the school so we can get a gauge for which one might be more popular. So that's an exciting development for us. And the other big thing that we're working on, legislature is amending the test day policy just to make it more clear that Brookline High School values that students should have the right to take a maximum of no more than 2 tests per day, unless they choose to take more, just to decrease the amount of stress around tests that goes on, especially senior year, as you progress through the high school, the number of classes you're taking and the homework can really pile up. And that's it. Thank you everyone for, trying your best to respect the time, the exchange students aren't the only ones who have homework tonight. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. I'll ask first if there are any questions. Ms. Charlowski?
I'm not sure, but I think the boys' basketball team is doing pretty well this year.
Yeah. I think I saw them in the Brookline tab.
Yeah.
It's gonna be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Jonathan, not to keep you here past your work time, so when you talk about the legislature reviewing a policy like the testing, how do you work with the headmaster to negotiate something like that? Because anything that you guys state in terms of the rights of students has a direct impact on the teachers, who then have to coordinate differently, or the teacher whose test is chosen not to be taken on a given day has to make other arrangements. That has impact on the staff, and I just wondered, since that would necessarily mean that the headmaster would have to work with you, I just wondered how you do that structurally.
So first of all, legislature is a combined body of students and faculty. So there are people representing both sides of that issue.
Okay.
And there was pushback on different aspects of the bill. How many times a student could postpone a test in a certain subject. And we're still trying to work out all those kinks. As for working with the headmaster, we email, and I believe we don't show her the bill until we've voted on it. And we come to a consensus about what we want to put in it.
But presumably the faculty that are on the legislature are reporting to their
yes
committee people and to the headmaster. Okay, great. That's great. That's all we need to know. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Yu. We have a number of additional items, but if you have homework to do, you're welcome. We're not asking you to leave, but we don't want you to get too far behind in your work.
I might. I think I will. Thank you.
Whatever you want.
The hopeful look on his face.
We won't reduce your pay at all. Dr. Lupini, do we have additional reports from you?
There are a few items, other than the introductions, in the report. The first is that we have, for the 5th time in the last 6 years, had one of our high school students selected as a Posse Scholar. Gigi Gray, who you've met as part of the MSAN group, will be going to Center College in Danville, Kentucky. Remember that the Posse program is a group of 10 students from Boston who are selected to attend a participating college or university, and these students go as a group of 10 to a series of team building and leadership trainings before they embark on their college experience. Gigi was selected this year as one of 15,000 nominations for 647 scholarship slots. And she is a terrific young lady, and we congratulate her, her teachers, and her mother, Denise Rhodes, who I think many of you also know. I gave you a copy of the EDCO annual report required by the collaborative legislation, which spells out not only the workings of EDCO, but also the programs offered there. And I'm sure that either Ms. Charlevsky or I would be happy to try to answer any questions on that report if you have any tonight or at any time. We've been working on with the police department to enhance the procedures related to emergency preparedness. One modification that we've made to those procedures, which we've told you about on a number of occasions, is the opportunity for classroom staff to use discretion and best judgment in certain situations. For example, a staff member may choose to evacuate rather than shelter in place during a situation, and we are beginning the process now in that collaborative relationship with the police department of utilizing some of those new protocols in the training that staff receive. Over the past number of days, I believe they're all out now, the school report cards. Yes, they are all. They all went out last week, yes. There was a modification in the school report card requirement. We at one point had used our at school in Brookline as our way of communicating all the information, necessary information to parents. That process has changed, and so we made a modification last week. Amy Martin did a terrific job of working with principals to tailor the school report card for each of our schools and to get that information out to parents. We're also, I believe, in the process of posting that to our website and making it available at Town Hall and in the Brookline Public Library. I've been giving you a number of updates regarding Park. One very good piece of information from the perspective of our principals is you may remember that we discussed that we have a number of schools where there are 3 sections of a grade level, and that particular grade level was chosen for Park participation. Principals were concerned about the fact that in all Park field tests, they were choosing 2 sections, and that was particularly difficult in a 3-section school, given the way the accountability ratings will be reported. So we made a request of DESE that in every grade span where we were selected and where we have 3 classes, that we be allowed to utilize the Park field test with all 3. And every one of those requests was granted. So in every one of those schools now, every section will participate in whatever that Park field test is, and therefore there will be no accountability determination, no accountability data for that grade level on that particular assessment, none for that particular grade level. There will be for the other subject area, because students, remember, are only participating in English language arts or mathematics, not both. So we're actually very pleased and very appreciative of the department staff, Bob Bickerton in particular, who worked very hard on our behalf to make sure that that Brookline was given this ability to do this. We're also Ms. Marr is also in the process of creating a park information site on our website where, bless you, where we not only include all the communication we've received from the commissioner, but all the pieces that we've distributed to staff and parents, so that we sort of create a one-stop shopping area on park for anyone who wants to know what we're up to. Janet McNeil, and we have a press release going out, by the way, on this and the announcement regarding Gigi, has been selected as a National Science Teacher Association Next Generation Science Standards Curator. Wow, that's a title, huh? And she serves as a part of an expert team tasked with compiling high-quality resources for teachers that support the next generation science standards. This is something that Ms. McNeil was very, very interested in doing, very excited about doing. And so we, on a number of different levels, are very pleased that she was chosen to participate in this. And her area of focus will be on ecosystems. And congratulations to Janet on that. The other two pieces I gave you were in terms of announcements, so I think that's my report. Happy to
Thank
answer
you.
questions if there are. You have a question.
Yes. Ms. Scotto.
This is just a quick question. On the park assessment, there are two different kinds, the performance-based and the end of the year.
Yes.
Would you explain, does a child in a given grade take, I don't mean this year, I mean when they're fully rolled out, will a child take 2 tests each year in a subject?
The answer, I believe, is yes. We have students this year who will, in the field test, actually do both. So I believe there's one class, I want to guess for a second that it's 4th grade at Lincoln, let's say in English Language Arts, where they're going to do the performance-based assessment, which is the substitute, if you will, for MCAS, and then the end-of-the-year assessment. They're 2 completely different time frames. One is the more traditional, the PBA is in the more traditional MCAS time frame, and the other assessment, I believe, happens after 90% of the school year. How about that, huh? Wow, has gone by. So it's sometime after May 15th-ish, in that neighborhood. They'll be administered sometime between May 15th and the 2nd week of June.
And the tests will be both in language arts and in math?
Yes.
So in other words, we are increasing, not we, but the testing will be increasing for each child instead of
So
one
at least
round.
in that manner, it looks like it's increasing. I think it's still unclear as to the number of sessions, whether it really constitutes an increase in total number of testing sessions. So I should leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
By the way, don't forget, one thing okay, I'll speak for myself. One thing that I've forgotten on a number of occasions is that there still will be a science MCAS. Okay, there is no science assessment being developed by either of the consortia, either Smarter Balance or Park. But Massachusetts will still have a science MCAS, which will be part of the accountability standards.
Ms. Ditkoff.
I was, the superintendent's latest was disappointing, because what I was hoping we could say is something like Park, which may eventually replace MCAS. Because I think a lot of people are confused about just what this is. Is this in addition to MCAS? Is this, like, people don't like, is this the national top-down test that we all have to take? I mean, I think there's so much misinformation about what Park is and how it interacts with MCAS that when we're producing materials for the public, to the extent that we can say Park, which may eventually replace MCAS as the standardized test for Massachusetts.
We actually do in those
Okay.
materials, and what we're waiting for right now in terms of some better materials is the Commonwealth and Park are supposed to be producing materials. The commissioner has actually shared them with the MASS Executive Committee. Some of them are good and some of them need some work. And so those materials will be out there for parents and sent to parents as well.
Okay. We have now Ms. Schmuckler, how about that?
So Dr. Schmuckler is here with us this evening, as always, and we'll be sharing with you tonight the work that she's done, really terrific work, to take the change in state law that was instituted last year in July to address a change in the bullying plan requirements around a redefinition of who can be considered a bully.
Right.
That is that adults, and I'll let her do that. But she's done a terrific job of working with staff and all of us to redraft our master plan to put the appropriate language and procedures in place. So, Dr. Schmuckler.
Thank you. So I'll also try and be brief. So this is, I'm sorry, yes. So this is the act relative to bullying, which was signed into law by Governor Patrick in 2010. And this is an amendment that was made to the act and signed into law in July of 2013. As you'll see from the plan, it's not necessarily a big change in terms of language and substance in the actual plan. I think the impact is going to be in the operational aspects of it. So what it does is it's an amendment that updates section 72 to 74 of chapter 38 of the Act. And the only change in the legal change is that the definition of perpetrator, which prior in the previous 2010 Act, a perpetrator and a target was only student-on-student bullying. The Act has been expanded to incorporate that the definition of perpetrator is now both a student and a member of school staff, and it's an expansive definition which includes but not limits to educators, administrators, school nurse, cafeteria workers, custodian, bus driver, athletic coach, advisor, to any extracurricular activity or paraprofessional. So it's really it's any adult working in a school building employed by the school department it falls under the amendment. So they became effective July 1. The definition of victim has not changed. So only a student may be the victim or target of bullying. So the difference is it's student on student, and staff people can now also be the perpetrator of bullying on a student. Okay, aggressor is a student, and what you see in red is just the very minimal change in language, or a member of a school staff who engages in bullying, cyberbullying, or retaliation towards a student. I put these in because these are the definitions. These are exactly the same. No changes in the definition of cyberbullying, no changes in the definition of retaliation. Hostile environment, the definition has stayed the same as well. Okay, so the bullying definition has changed and been modified. It's the repeated use by one or more students or a member of school staff. So that's the addition of a written, verbal, or electronic expression or a physical act or gesture or any combination thereof directed at a target, and the target being the student. These descriptions have not changed from the 2010 Act. That again just describes what school staff includes as part of the definition, and target is a student against whom bullying, cyberbullying, or retaliation has been perpetrated. So obviously there's a change in the reporting aspect of the Act. So a staff member will report to the principal or designee, and this is the change, or to the superintendent or designee when the principal or the assistant principal is the alleged aggressor. And an additional add, or to the school committee or designee when the superintendent is the alleged aggressor, when he/she witnesses or becomes aware of conduct that may be bullying or retaliation. So the chain of reporting now moves beyond the school. Superintendent for principal, assistant principal, school committee. This language is the same. It's just, again, the change of its principal or designee, superintendent or designee, when the principal or assistant principal is the alleged aggressor. So that's the reporting change. This has remained the same, again, except for the chain of command of reporting when it is a staff who is the alleged perpetrator. Again, the principals, so this is the same principals are responsible for the implementation and oversight of their bullying plans, again, except when the reporting incident involves the principal or assistant principal. And in that case, the superintendent or designee will be responsible for investigating the report and other steps necessary to implement the plan, including addressing the safety of the alleged victim. And that, again, is the same language. If the superintendent is the alleged aggressor, the school committee or its designee takes that oversight and role in terms of investigation. This is just, and it's not that easy to see, I just put it in here. We added a decision tree, which wasn't in our prior plan, just to help staff and principals sort of go through the flow of when it's bullying and when to go. And the entire thing is new, but you'll see it in front of you. The intervention strategies, there is a piece around that when it is a staff aggressor, that there's a piece around where there's a liaison piece with HR. And so obviously some of the issues that may come up cross over into human resources issues. So there's a consultation piece where people are advised to consult with HR when a staff member is involved. We had an incident report form that's been updated, and this is the form that is made available in schools on our website or will be made available. You don't have to use a form to report bullying, but the form then also reflects that if it's an incident where a staff member is the alleged perpetrator of the bullying. So that's really it in terms of the change and practice and the master plan. Any questions?
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing us up to date. We had a smaller version of this conversation when we did the policy amendments around this that had to incorporate similar language. I was just curious, given that I feel like a flight attendant, in the unlikely event that that the school committee receives a report of an allegation of bullying by the superintendent against a student, is there training that we, at least our chair and vice chair, should go through, so that, is there training that principals go, is there any training? In other words, we have the decision tree, which would be very helpful. I'm just curious about our ability to respond appropriately should that unlikely event occur.
So that is a great question, and clearly something we haven't thought about in terms of, since this is new. So there is training, or has been training for principals, and I think that would be appropriate in terms of, as this evolves, that the school committee members would go through training as well.
It may not be appropriate for me to speak to this, but I will anyhow. I mean, I think that's an interesting question for MASC, because the language also includes designee.
Correct.
And I know in some other policy situations where there's these kinds of potential of a school committee getting a report about the superintendent's behavior of X or Y or Z, that I know MASC has made some recommendations about using legal counsel or others as designee for those investigations.
Right, can I just follow up? So I'm mostly concerned because I know from the few conversations that I've had with our principals about the implementation of this, that the timelines for filing reports and investigating are really quite tight. And that's, out of respect to the victim and the victim's family and notifications. So even if we're going to send it to someone else, I think in order to comply and in order to be sensitive to the requirements for the alleged victim, we would need to know exactly what we're supposed to do ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah. And the reporting requirement is within 10 days of notification of the incident, so you're right. It's that the investigation has to be been conducted. And I think with all things, in talking with my colleagues in other districts, nobody's, in the unlikely event, it hasn't, for most of us, it hasn't come up yet. So we're going to learn from experience, and, we've, had discussions here around some of the experiences might impact. Exactly, it may never come up, either at the school level or above. But so again, it's like a lot of things. There's no practice to really look at. There's no examples of
to learn from other districts, and there are no other states where anyone's had any experience with this, so it's very much new territory.
Yes, Ms. Titkoff.
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Schmuckler, for continuing to keep this in the forefront of what we're working on. This is obviously an issue important to many of us, and while we're focusing on some technical aspects right now, it's just important in general, and so thank you.
Great.
Ms. Schmuckler, can I just ask you one quick question? I'm trying to remember whether there is a periodic, as part of the legislation, there is a periodic report required for the school committee?
No.
Not in the legislation.
We do, there's annual reports that go from the superintendent's office to the state, but not to the school committee.
We should just check the policy. I
And
think there
we
may
will.
be something in our policy that says that the school committee would like to see on an annual basis or something
Yeah.
like that.
I mean, maybe that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea. Thank you so much, really. Bravo. Dr. Lupini, you're up again, I think.
I do think, if I can expand on the last point a little bit, I do think talking about the policy is a great opportunity to, again, talk about the number of people who we've had do such great work around the totality of the program, which goes beyond what's actually in the state law and the requirements, to really focus on the spirit of that law. And Dr. Fisher-Mueller's had a great hand in that. Dr. Schmuckler's had a great hand in that. Dr. Allen's had a great hand in that. Mindy Paulo, Ms. Paulo's had a terrific role in that. I'm going to forget people, so I won't try to mention the team that was assembled to really do the training at building levels, the teams that function in each building, the great work that principals have done in implementing really the spirit of that, and this year including the high school. Which is we said, remember from the very beginning, a very difficult place to do the requirements, to do this work, to do the requirements of the legislation. So thank you to all of them. As was pointed out, on Monday morning, I got a chance to speak with your finance subcommittee regarding the bridge budget. Mr. Kleckner spoke with the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday evening, and last night we had the chance to together present where we are in this bridge budget conversation to the Override Study Committee. So here I am again to talk about it a little bit more. And I've actually incorporated some pieces of his slides in this. This is one of them. What Mel's laid out in this particular slide is that this being, and I think this is an important point that we don't mention often enough in these conversations, this is at least our second bridge budget. At least our second bridge budget. Last year we talked about a budget as a bridge budget. There's a significant difference here in that from almost from the very beginning, the focus here has not only been on the shortfall, the structural shortfall in our budget of about $1.25 million, but on those other areas that we've been able to identify that I've stopped calling catch-up areas and started calling classroom supports, because that's what they are, and on our technology plan. So this is a slide that Mr. Kleckner's used to illustrate that not only are we dealing with that shortfall, structural shortfall, but also guidance, nursing, specialists, administration, and the technology plan. Again, his slide, that this particular, given what I will say, given what I think we've been able to put on the table in terms of the shortfalls in those areas, this was a budget that just screamed out for something more than tweaking, and would become an interim solution, part of a more permanent solution that would avoid major reductions in educational program, stem the erosion of support staffing, and begin work on our technology initiative. He laid these out as principles of the bridge budget, that it would be sustainable, that is, become part of the base budget for the future, that it would retain the spirit of the town-school partnership, that it would limit major policy decisions better considered as part of the override process, build upon preliminary recommendations of the override study committee around non-tax revenue enhancements and some expenditures and efficiencies, and that would coordinate with capital-related decisions of the override. He laid out this piece of a timeline, which I'll talk about a little bit more specifically. Consideration by the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, Advisory Committee, and a presentation to the Override Study Committee. Further direction and modification of the schedule to the Override Study Committee to the points that Ms. Ditkoff made earlier. Review with the Town School Partnership, which we're in the process of trying to set up now. I believe we're going to be able to try to pull off for next week. To meet with Town School Partnership to talk about the bridge budget. And then presentation, I think he meant by February 15th, because I believe we both present our financial plans on February 11th. And then the rest of this is my presentation from last evening. So in a little bit more detail. So we get to the $1.25 million structural shortfall. You'll hear this many times between now and February 11th. With some assumptions. And those assumptions included a 5% increase in health insurance premiums, a 2% increase in collective bargaining, which is a number that the town has been carrying, plus the tail from our current BEU agreement, new kindergarten enrollment of 630 students. This would create a projected shortfall of $1.25 million. It also includes $1 million for classroom enrollment growth. So that's the factor that we've used a number of times in the past, only focused on classroom teachers. $500,000 for special education, mainly increases in out-of-district tuitions and placements, and $750,000, and I'll remind you, net increase to steps and lanes. The actual figure for increases to steps and lanes is more in the neighborhood of 1.1 to 1.2 million. The $750,000 is net of retirements. And it also includes an assumption of a 6% increase in early education tuitions for the coming year. So that's what led us to that shortfall. It does not include, to Mr. Kleckner's point, any allocations for additions to staffing in classroom support areas like guidance counselors, psychologists, nurses, vice principals, or any funding for our technology plan that we've put forward outside of $400,000 that is already included in the capital improvement plan. Our goal from the beginning of this discussion about a bridge budget with Mr. Kleckner has been to advocate strongly for $800,000 toward classroom supports and an additional $800,000 toward a technology plan that would then allow us to go back and answer more completely those questions that were being asked by the Override Study Committee. For example, could you take this $3.4 million package that you've put in front of us around classroom supports, and could you take a look at it over time? And what we've said is absolutely. As part of a budget that we can present on February 11th for $800,000 in that area, we can then take the rest of that shortfall in those areas and show you a plan for the coming years that you could consider as part of an override. So the concept under review, again, from Mr. Kleckner's memo to the Board of Selectmen, includes allocation of new non-tax general revenue increases. And again, to Ms. Ditkoff's point, the one that's been talked about the most in that category is a potential increase to parking meter rates that would come to the school department, notwithstanding the traditional 50% revenue split. An increase in school department fees for services and or rental rates for use of school facilities. So what we've said as we've listened carefully to the override study is there are some issues that we might want to recommend to you and that you might want to consider as part of implementation in an FY15 budget. Okay, one of them might be around the rental of our facilities and additional revenue that could be generated there. Use of school department reserves. We have talked with Mr. Kleckner and Mr. Cronin about what portion of reserves in a bridge budget concept we would feel comfortable recommending as part of that budget that got us to some logical next step for FY16. A review of budget assumptions for Chapter 78, which we'll have next week in terms of the governor's budget. We'll have the governor's budget next week. GIC health insurance premium rates, and we're fortunate enough that Mr. Kleckner actually sits on the board there and so has sort of an inside track of what we might be able to expect that we now anticipate could be lower than the 5% that's assumed in our budget. And then what our assumptions are in terms of collective bargaining reserves, because that's what they are, given that we don't have collective bargaining agreements. And then implementation of operating budget efficiencies, and I've mentioned a couple near the end of these slides. So the conversation that we're having about the specifics, and let me say this here, that I didn't go into this detail last night, but when you talk about a $1.25 million structural shortfall, a desire to put $800,000 into classroom supports, and another $800,000 into technology, you have a number you're shooting for, right? Somewhere in the $2.8 million range, I believe. And so so you take a look at these different factors and weigh what you're willing to do in terms of a bridge budget to get you to that number. And that's exactly the conversation that we're having on an ongoing basis. So we've been asked a number of times, what specifically do we spend these dollars on? And I've specifically given the answer, I present a budget on February 11th, every time. Is it the 12th? That's okay. Yes. So that's okay, February 11th. So the one we probably have the best handle on right now, again, given that assumption, is the classroom teacher portion. We know that we need somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 elementary classroom teachers, another 3 teachers at the middle level, another 5.2 teachers at the high school level, and I forget the number, I think it's 3.9 in terms of classroom specialists. So we know that one. It's fairly easy, it's formulaic, right? And it's based on that assumption it's a very simple assumption of 630 new incoming kindergartners. The other students are here, and they're moving through the system, and they're going to the high school now. That's a factor that we've not had to include in our prior budgets. Next year's the first. What's a little more difficult right now, and we spent a good deal of time on it again today, is what are the priorities in terms of that $3.4 million that we put out for a look in classroom supports. What are the priorities for next year? What are the things and the schools where we absolutely need those? So we're looking at a package that includes the issues that you see in front of you in that category, which includes vice principals, includes a principal for the Old Lincoln School, includes continuation of our literacy initiative, includes looking at our nursing staffing across the district, includes looking at guidance counselors and psychologists, and a number of special education roles, as well as classroom supplies, building repair and maintenance, and high school security personnel. Now, one of the things that we said to principals is even the budget conversations that we've gone through with them exceed considerably $800,000. So we're having to choose the priorities off of that list in order to build into this. And I think we're getting there. I think we're getting there, and we'll do some more work on that next Wednesday when we meet with our principals. And technology, we have been able to take, by the way, just a reminder one more time, that this classroom support number, the first time when we presented this number was $3.4 million. Okay? We were asked very quickly, could you give us an implementation plan of that number? I very simply threw out, sure, take it and divide it into thirds. I mean, I'd want to do something much more scientific on that, but take it and divide it into thirds and come up with $1.1 million a year. So this is $800,000. So when I'm asked what the priorities are within this $800,000, I say, I've already done that twice. Right? I've already done that twice. I've already narrowed this down to the issues that need to be addressed in next year's budget. Technology plan is exactly the same kind of discussion. This is a plan that originally had an expenditure, I think it was 1.5 to 1.6 in the first year. We We asked Mr. Moore, Dr. Fisher-Mueller to take another look at that. They came back with a 4-year implementation of a new $2.5 million annual expenditure, but ramped up to that and started with a number around $1.3 million. Now we're at $800,000 in terms of an implementation. So I've already scaled back that number twice, right? And we believe this is the number that needs to be done in order to meet some of the goals that we've laid out for this program. So this includes some of the technical areas. What we talked about last night was increasing the number of students, computers available to students. What we talked about was a better infrastructure in each of our schools. What we talked about is taking a 5-year plan for our staff, for a rotation of technology among our staff, and reducing it to 4 years. Okay? So we talked about those as 3 major goals, and when we talk with you more about this item and this item of classroom supports at that finance meeting coming up at the end of the month, we'll be able to talk with you in much greater detail about what fills these categories. So in terms of these other areas that we're looking at, and again spent quite a bit of time on today, we think there are some areas that we can really improve service and that do bring some efficiencies to our operation. I talked some about these last night. One is around scheduling of buildings. So I don't believe you can do the policy work that's asked in this second bullet unless you can improve upon the way you schedule your buildings. I don't believe this can be done at the building level. We don't have the staff to do that at the building level in terms of the way rental's handled now. So we're talking here about scheduling of buildings in a centralized fashion to maximize usage and to maximize fee collection. And we'll have some very specific proposals around that. We're talking about revamping our registrar and residency issues. We have a registrar at the high school. We don't have that type of function at the elementary level. Strangely enough, as close as we come to it is during a 4-week period in the summer when we actually do have an elementary registrar. And strangely enough, we have better data from that 4-week period of time in terms of the way students are registered, how they get into our system, the residency checks, all of those kinds of things than we have during the rest of the year. And I don't think that's a coincidence. So we're looking at ways to combine those functions and actually improve the way we go about implementing the policy that was referred to earlier tonight, long time ago, back around 6:15 or so, around the piece that's been implemented to check on residency on an annual basis. Okay? And fee collection was actually in our plan last year. It's essentially the same proposal that we made to you last year to centralize all of our fee collection. Because of the way that things evolved this year, we didn't get a chance to actually implement that. We were waiting for some software also that the town's been looking at, and we anticipate being able to do that next year, and it will be part of that package. We've gone through this and found that the costs to implement these areas of improvement are minimal. Under $100,000 to implement these areas of improvement in our system. And so what I reminded the Override Study Committee of last night is that the adoption of a school department budget is a function of the school committee, and that you have a timeline for doing that, and that begins on February 11th with the introduction of the superintendent's budget message. And we're happy to share updates as we go along between now and then, but we have an awful lot of work to do between now and then. And so we will do that. We will introduce that to you on February 11th, and we'll talk some in detail about it at the end of the month at a finance subcommittee meeting. The detailed budget is made available to you on February 28th. We do the detailed presentation on March 13th. You have a public hearing scheduled for March 27th, and you take a vote on your budget on April 10th. And we have a lot of information and a lot of discussion to go between here and there on this bridge budget conversation in terms of nailing down the specific numbers, because the goal, as Mr. Kleckner stated last night, was to really be a pressure relief, right, off of this conversation that's been going on, and to be able to provide some time for people to take a look at some of these recommendations in a thoughtful fashion for future budgets, to be able to put a 15 budget package together that the town and schools, through the town-school partnership with the advisory committee, can agree to and then implement it for FY15 and move on in our conversations from there as to some of these bigger picture issues that we need to deal with. So that's our goal. Again, I anticipate that in between all this, there'll be a town-school partnership meeting. I hope that that occurs next week. That's our goal. We will update you on where we are specific to these numbers. So even though Mr. Kleckner said last night we're still working these numbers, right, the assurance I have from him is that we are continuing to work with these as the numbers as we put together our budget, right? And we will circle back next week when we get the governor's House 1. We'll circle back when Mr. Kleckner makes some judgments about what we may be able to do in terms of the health insurance number. We'll circle back when the selectmen begin considering things like an increase to parking revenue, which could occur, as I understand it, yeah, exactly. So we'll continue to work these numbers and work those pieces of the program that would allow these numbers to be put in place. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Any other questions? Ms. Stone?
I'm so sorry, Dr. Lupini. I know you have been through this
okay.
very recently. So there were some questions last night from the Override Study Committee about to what extent some of their preliminary suggestions that may involve what they interpret from their perspective as easy policy changes could be incorporated into the bridge budget rather than going into a longer-term set of recommendations to the school committee. And I just want to be very sure that we all know the answer to that question, because I can't believe that last night was the only time it will come up. So as this process moves forward, there are also other uncertainties, such as the vote of the selectmen. I understand the selectmen have had a very brief conversation about this already. They are, in general, supportive of the idea, so that's a very good thing. But there is a final vote for them as well on the budget, and then there's the approval of town meeting. So there are a lot of...
Committee in between there.
And the advisory committee, right, to say nothing of the advisory committee. So I'm curious, since I can imagine the question that was asked last night coming up in each of those venues as this process moves forward.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how you are thinking about preparing this, what the interaction is, if any, between the kinds of things that may be coming out of the preliminary recommendations from the Override Study Committee and the way you're developing the preliminary budget message?
Sure, and just keep in mind that some of those areas, while I've been involved in those discussions, last night was the first I'd seen them sort of gauged in that manner. So I think the easiest answer for me to give is that we'll take a look at them through this process. I mean, I've mentioned one, right, around building rental and some policy changes that I do believe is doable in an FY15 plan, and that I anticipate us making some specific recommendations, working with the policy subcommittee to create a structure that would allow some additional revenue in that area to happen. There are others that I don't necessarily agree with a characterization of them being easy policy changes, and easy may be different than timely, right? Because so, for example, I'll mention this one because it was discussed fairly prominently last night. I mean, a change to Metco and a new target number, for example, which I wouldn't characterize as easy on any level, is also not timely because we're already into that process. We have been for 4 weeks, right? Same with materials fee. We've already been into a process in terms of the first stage of that, which is our professional staff, for 3 or 4 weeks. So
So we have to gauge everyone through sort of that lens, right? And think about it in terms of what might be incorporated into some recommendations as part of this package to you, if that answers your question. Okay.
Ms. Titkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Thank you to Peter and Jennifer and everyone else who spent so much time trying to pull this together, standing on one foot, as it were, spinning plates in the air. So there are lots of things to underscore, but I'll just pick a couple. One is that this is already a compromise, and so to the extent that that needs to be said over and over again, it needs to be said. I think that the one of the pieces, just as one tiny example, one piece of the technology presentation that Dr. Fisher-Mueller and Scott Moore gave to the Override Study Committee, one piece that was very compelling was a very simple chart that basically said, what are the number of students per computer? And it sort of reduced a whole lot of words into a very simple number that people could understand that said, we are behind. Here is a number that shows you we are behind. So I think that, I'm not sure if this is even possible, but to the extent that anyone could say the $3.4 million would get you this far against that, and the $800,000 gets you this far against it. You know, there's still distance to go. We are still behind. Just something really super simple for people, because I think when we start talking about bandwidth and infrastructure, people's eyes sort of, whereas like students per computer is just really, really simple for people to understand. So I guess anywhere where those very simple numbers, I would say the same thing is true for any of the ratios that we've collected on nurses or guidance counselors or anywhere else. And and sort of here's how far it gets, here's the benchmark, here's where we are, and this plan gets you 20% of the way there rather than 90% of the way there. I think just in a very simple sentence would be incredibly helpful as we try to explain this to folks like the Town School Partnership or anyone else who has not been as intimately involved. I think the last thing I would say is, well, two things. One is the town administrator very clearly, as I heard him say, and I tried to reiterate it, that there would be, from his perspective, the concept of the bridge does not include controversial policy changes, because otherwise the whole point of a bridge is to expedite a process. And if you are talking about implementing controversial or difficult policy changes, that's pretty much the opposite. So I thought that it was a very wise statement on his part, and I'm not sure everybody on the Override Study Committee heard it, but the point of a bridge and being expedient means, again, this is to Mr. Chang's comment earlier, that you're not actually exploring controversial policy changes in a 6-week period. So that's what we're saying again. And then the last thing I would say is the chairman and I had the distinct pleasure of sitting through the audit presentation of the town's auditors to the town on Tuesday night, because we don't spend enough time in this building. And I thought I heard the auditors very clearly say that the reserves of the town are, if you include the reserves, the stabilization fund, are not only healthy, but extraordinarily healthy.
Double the requirement for a AAA.
Double the requirement for a AAA bond rating. And so while we were all rightfully proud of the town for being fiscally responsible and having high reserves, it also is worth noting that our reserves are in the X range, and we are using 50% of those reserves. The town's reserves are in the $20 million range, and we are not touching them in this bridge budget. So I just wanted to remind us that as we are quibbling about $10,000 here and there, to think about the concept of what does this mean for the town to have a bridge, to take a step back and take a deep breath. The town administrator, when I asked him this question, indicated that he was not interested in using town reserves towards this bridge budget. I guess all I would say is, again, as we think about relatively small amounts of money compared to the types of reserves the town has and the level of depletion that it leaves the schools with, that number is worth, whether or not it's access, that number is important to highlight and continue to highlight, because this is a town school problem, not a school problem. This is growth related, not due to inefficiency. Anyway, lots of other stuff, but I'll leave it there. I just feel like those in particular are ones I would want to underscore.
Can I just make, off that, I just want to make one other point. I mean, the other piece of our conversation that I've really appreciated from senior staff members is that we actually believe a bridge has to lead to somewhere, right? And so we've really grasped onto this piece about, you know, what does this look like over time, not only over time, but what does it look like particularly in FY16? So in FY16, we have a complicated set of recommendations coming next week, right? We're going to use the old Lincoln School as a school building. And I don't think it's any secret to anyone that we're talking about middle level, and that we're talking about a 3-year period, and that certainly includes, because of the project that we're about to embark on, that it includes the devotion school. I don't think that's a secret to anyone. It includes another school, and we've been looking at how that works. And so so we have a principle built into this because we believe it takes a year. The more we think of the job description, that's a complicated job for a year because you're extracting teachers, you're extracting specialists. Principals are left to try to figure out because, for example, a world language teacher in many of our buildings doesn't just work in 6, 7, and 8. They're part of the elementary program. And so there's some real extraction of some great marbling that's going on, right, in elementary schools to do. But a building of 500 students also has a vice principal. So when it opens, it has a vice principal. So as we're thinking about these vice principal recommendations, we're thinking about how they flow into that. As we're thinking about our nursing recommendations at the elementary level, we're thinking about how they flow into that. As we're thinking about our guidance recommendations, we're thinking about how they flow into that. So we have that longer-term plan. This isn't just, I think the Baker School and the Pierce School need vice principals. They do, right, in addition to what they have. This is, what does that look like if one of those schools happens to be the school where we move the middle grades, and what does that do? What does that create in terms of the opportunity for us to staff the vice principalship for that 3-year period? So that has to be part of our conversation, and that is efficient. Right?
It's not a cut.
Other questions? I guess I have a comment and then maybe a question. One is that I think we may be becoming, we just assume that the collaboration that's taken place between you and the town administrator is standard operating procedure here in Brookline. We know it's not true in other cities and towns, and we might forget that our town administrator hasn't been here that long, and that it's been up to you to really forge a new relationship with a new town administrator, and clearly, by virtue of having accomplished what you've accomplished even so far, I think you've done a really good job with that, and I'm sure we all appreciate it. In the question of other strategies, your slide number 12, there are 4 not uncomplicated issues which you've talked there about implementing, and I'm just wondering, my sense is that those are all responsibilities for Mr. Rowe. Am I correct? Or are you going to take some of those, or how is that going to get implemented?
So I'm not going to look at Dr. Schmuckler, as I say. I think that they mainly fall within our 3 areas, within my area, Mr. Rowe's area, and Dr. Schmuckler's area. But really, it's the entirety of the senior staff team. We think they're that important, and we believe there are efficiencies within those to our operation, the ability to maximize collection of revenues, and, as you've heard me say a number of times before, to provide better service to people. So we'll figure them out.
Okay. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, and if there are no other questions, we thank Dr. Lupini very much. I know that you've had practically nothing to do for the past few months, and this is just another example. On the other hand, is there any new business that anyone would like to conduct this evening? God bless you, right? In that case, I will say that this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.